Chapter 1108. The Power of the Primordial Chaos Daluo. The Grand Pure One is not simple. Ever since Lin Yuan realized that his cultivation was damaged, the system, which had been pretending to be dead, was blown out. Although Lin Yuan did not communicate with the system, he still thought of some things in his mind. Mosquito Daoren recited the Tao Te Ching, which was tantamount to showing his roots. Without a doubt, Mosquito Daoren was definitely one of the Grand Pure One's favorite disciples. After all, this Mosquito Daoren, one of the primordial 5 ferocious worms, became famous in order to buy time for the Grand Pure One to become a Buddha. But now, it seemed that things were not as simple as he had expected. Attacking the Western sect was really just a matter of convenience for the Grand Pure One, and it was a matter of convenience. The Grand Pure One's incarnation, Li Er, went to the mortal world and created Taoism. He passed the position of the sect master of Ren and the primordial purple chi to the great Taoist master Xian. He also used the heaven and earth exquisite black and yellow pagoda, the Vajra bracelet, and the Tao Te Ching to suppress the luck of Taoism. Thus, it caused the origin of the great Tao to tremble and gave a Tao fruit to the Grand Pure One. The Grand Pure One abolished the position of the heavenly Tao sage and established a sect. He received the support of endless merit of the great Tao. His realm fell to the peak of the sage to be, and he regained the primordial chaos Daluo golden immortal realm. After calling himself the Tao sage, he became a true Tao ancestor. Even the profound sect belonged to the Tao. Since the appearance of the Tao Te Ching, the Grand Pure One could truly transcend the world and be free. He was no longer under the jurisdiction of the heavenly Tao. The system showed words of praise. Of course, if it was still the heavenly Tao of the primordial world, it would definitely be furious after being stabbed in the back by the Grand Pure One. However, the problem was that he was just an incomplete origin of the heavenly Tao of the primordial world. Ever since Hong Jun merged with the heavenly Tao and stole its authority, he became a special existence that wandered in the universe. Therefore, it was not unhappy that the Grand Pure One had escaped the control of the heavenly Tao. Instead, it was still in the primordial world because the Grand Pure One still stayed in the primordial world after he transcended. It must have had a plot against Hong Jun. It was happy that Hong Jun had a strong enemy. But the problem is, Lin Yuan and the system opened their mouths almost at the same time. Both of them looked surprised. Logically speaking, the Grand Supreme had established Taoism, attained the status of Tao Saint, and accepted the Taoist sect under his wing. To Hong Jun, such an action was not as simple as losing the position of Tao ancestor. If Hong Jun was not an innate god and had obtained the absolute right to rule the Eldritch world, he would not be a match for the Grand Supreme at all. Otherwise, the Grand Elder would not have stayed in the untainted world to continue the game with Hong Jun after stabbing him in the back. After all, the world of cultivation was the same in that world. The law of the jungle was the key. If one did not have the strength of a chess player, the chess player on the other side did not need to play with him at all. He could just kill him directly. But the biggest problem was that the Grand Supreme's series of actions were done right under Hong Jun's nose. Why did this happen? Was Hong Jun's eyes covered, or did he not want to care about it and deliberately let the situation develop to this point? If it was the former, could there be an existence equal to Hong Jun in the entire Eldritch world who held back Hong Jun when the Grand Supreme moved and prevented Hong Jun from interfering with the Grand Supreme's Tao? If it was the latter, they even had to carefully consider whether the Grand Supreme was an enemy or a friend. The most terrible thing was that no matter which of these two possibilities was true, it was not good news for Lin Yuan. Because in the Eldritch world, there were some existences who could shake Hong Jun, who was in harmony with the Tao of Heaven, but they were definitely old monsters at the level of Yang Mei and Shi Chen. Since they did not participate in the suppression of Hong Jun back then, they might not do anything today, countless years later. Therefore, the person who held back Hong Jun was definitely someone who had a deep hatred for Hong Jun. After counting, there were only a few people, who were either powerhouses of the human Tao or powerhouses of the Tao. There were several versions of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors since ancient times. After eliminating the least possibility of the 3 sovereigns, Fuxi, Zhurong, Shennong, and Fuxi Nuwa, and Shinnong, it was certain that no matter which version of the 3 sovereigns there were 2 powerful figures, Fuxi and Shinnong. The remaining one, whether it was Suiren or the Yellow Emperor, was not easy to deal with. Especially the Yellow Emperor Shen Yuan, who repeatedly jumped between the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, was an absolute hero who mastered killing and conquering. Lin Yuan even personally believed that these 4 versions were wrong. The real three sovereigns should be the three human leaders, Yu Chao, Suiren, and Ji Shang, who were recorded in Zhuangzi. However, although the three human sovereigns shared the fruit of the heavenly way sage, the three of them were not to be trifled with. If they set up a trap to trick Hong Jun into the fire cloud cave, it was definitely more than enough to hold Hong Jun back for 100 years. As for the powerhouse of the Tao, there was nothing to say. There was only the primordial spirit of the Earth Empress, who had turned into Samsara, Empress Pingxin. Although Empress Pingxin, who was supposed to be on par with Hong Jun, became a prisoner in the netherworld, if she had any plans, whether it was the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva of the Western religious sect, the 10 Yama kings of the underworld, the immortals of the Xian Men and the Divine Way, or even the mysterious Lord of Mount Tai, they might not be able to gain any benefits in the netherworld. After all, Empress Pingxin was invincible in the netherworld. If she wanted to do something, Hongjuan's real body had to suppress her, and it would take a long time. Was there anyone in the untainted land who was easy to deal with? Not to mention the system itself, which had been causing trouble for Hongjun, Tong Tian, who was sent out by San Qing, was also a top powerhouse in any great wide world. Therefore, for countless years, the system and Tong Tian were not the only ones who were secretly active. The powerhouses in the untainted land were also trying to find ways to save themselves, such as the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, Dao Pingxin, and Taishang Tao ancestor. Now, they might have completely gotten rid of the Black Jiao's control. Death test. It was not necessarily a person or a thing. In recent years, Hong Jun had been going against the flow and ruling the untainted land alone. The others had been complaining about him for a long time. It was impossible to change the old habits. Sooner or later, a long war would break out. The secret brewing in the heaven martial world was probably just a fuse. From Lin Yuan's point of view, it was a good thing for the overall situation. After all, when fighting against Hong Jun, he could have a group of powerful allies, which would greatly increase his chances of winning. However, from the perspective of his own interests, if they met, how should he face Empress Pingxin? What attitude would Empress Pingxin have towards him? Chapter 1109. Lin Yuan pondered for a moment and opened his mouth to speak. Suddenly, a voice exploded in his mind. Lin Yuan, if you kill this mosquito Daoren for me, I will reward you generously. This was the voice of Shangqing Heavenly Lord. Lin Yuan was speechless. Therefore, it was better to rely on oneself than on anyone else. Among the Sanqing family, although the Grand Supreme had always played the role of a big brother and a peacemaker, they were still brothers after all. Their relationship was not bad. Even when the Sanqing family joined forces to plot against Hong Jun, the Grand Supreme and Yuanshi were not selfish at all and sent the youngest Tongtian sect leader out. But now, because of the old grudge between the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit and the Mosquito Daoren, Shangqing Heavenly Lord actually asked him to kill the Mosquito Daoren without hesitation. This was really... He did not know what to say. With the Tongtian sect leader's protective and vengeful character, he was probably beyond saving. Seeing that Lin Yuan did not respond, Shangqing Heavenly Lord clenched his teeth and communicated with Lin Yuan through divine thoughts again. The 4 celestial slaying swords are still in my original body's hands. If you help me get rid of this fiend, I will sacrifice my face and ask for the 4 celestial slaying swords and the celestial slaying formation map for you. So what? Although Hong Jun did not have a good reputation, the great Tao of 3 corpses was indeed something. Although the cultivation of the 3 corpses incarnations could not surpass the original body, most of the 3 corpses incarnations were transformed from treasures. Most of them were not inferior to the original body in terms of combat power. They even mastered some techniques that the original body would be envious of. More importantly, the 3 corpses incarnations had independent consciousness. Although they would listen to the instructions of the original body, when they were independent, it was not wrong to say that the 3 corpses incarnations were 3 independent cultivators. Just like how Shangqing Heavenly Lord was one of the 3 corpses incarnations of the Tongtian sect leader, but he still addressed the original body as a fellow cultivator. As for whether his words could be trusted or not, after all, he was one of the Sanqing. Although the Tongtian sect leader did not care about his reputation as much as the Heavenly Lord Yuanshi, he could still stick to his words. In addition, the Tongtian sect leader had asked Meng Qi to kill Mosquito Daoren, which meant that Meng Qi had formed a karma with the Taishang. On the other hand, the Shangqing Heavenly Lord had also formed a karma with Meng Qi. If the Shangqing Heavenly Lord did not give Meng Qi the 4 immortal slaying swords and the immortal slaying formation map, the karma would harm Meng Qi sooner or later. Junior will try his best. Lin Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly as he agreed with a smile. What was there to be afraid of having karma with the Tao Saint Grand Elder? Ever since he had been saved by the system and sent to the Heaven Martial World, he had formed karma with Hong Jun. Lin Yuan was very clear about this. From the start, he had been trying to level the relationship between himself and the system because he knew that he did not owe the system any karma. Although the system had saved him, it had also nurtured him as a weapon to deal with Hong Jun. Thus, he did not owe the system anything. Then there was the problem. Since he had already formed a karma with Hong Jun, so what if there was another Tao Saint? If he could not defeat Hong Jun, his body and soul would be destroyed. Senior Luo Ho was an excellent example. If he could defeat Hong Jun, it meant that he would not be afraid when facing the Taishang Tao Saint. He would just have to use his strength to fight. The main thing was that the Taishang's personality was there. If one said that he was quiet and did not do anything, there would be no problem. He could play the role of a good big brother and a good teacher. However, when it came to matters that would affect his fundamental interests, the Taishang would not be heartless. Lin Yuan did not believe that the Taishang would fight to the death with him for the sake of Mosquito Daoren. There were no good people in the Eldritch world. Be it Sanqing, Hong Yun, Hong Jun, or even the various Eldritch world bosses, if one were to compare them seriously, one would not be able to find half a good person. In other words, those who were truly good would not be able to leave their names in the harsh environment of the Eldritch world. They would have been eaten clean. Different from those stories that had been processed by art, the real cultivation world was a place where the strong preyed on the weak. Although it was not to the extent that people would kill for treasures and seek revenge every day, similar things were done by everyone. Although the shameless duo of the Western sect was extremely shameless, on the other hand, they were the most honest existences. Shameless was shameless, evil was evil, and they did not hide it. In terms of actions, one did not care about one's heart. In terms of heart, there was no saint. This sentence was applicable in any world and any place. As for protecting one's shortcomings, the Tong Tian sect leader's character of protecting one's shortcomings was the same as the Yuanshi Tianzuan's pride. The latter did not care who the problem was. As long as one embarrassed him, he would fight it out. However, the Tong Tian sect leader did not care who one was or what one's background was. If one dared to touch the person he liked, he would definitely kill that person. However, protecting one's shortcomings did not mean that the Tong Tian sect leader would do it at all costs. Just like now, although Mosquito Daoren, who killed the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit, was close at hand, Shangqing Tianzuan, who had the ability to kill him, did not do it directly. Instead, he did not hesitate to use the 4 celestial slaying swords and the celestial slaying sword diagram as the price to ask Lin Yuan to do it. It was obvious that he did not want to fall out with the Taishang, but he also wanted to avenge the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit. Naturally, it was the same when it came to the Taishang. When Lin Yuan's cultivation of the scripture of all beings was completed, he would definitely not be inferior to a sage of the Great Path. Coupled with the supremacy of the Great Path, Lin Yuan's strength would definitely not be inferior to that of an Origin Daluo Golden Immortal with the help of the scripture of all beings. If he went to the Tianwu world, even Hong Jun at his peak would have to temporarily avoid him. He did not believe that the Taishang would fall out with him over a Mosquito Daoren and insist on a life-and-death battle. System: deduct the power of incense and increase the power of the celestial slaying sword formation. A cold light flashed through Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes, and he silently communicated with the system in his mind. In the instant that he said this, the power of incense suddenly dropped and directly fell to 300 million. Although Lin Yuan was pained, he could understand. Laozi had bestowed the original copy of the Tao De Sutra to Yi Shi. Apparently, after Yi Shi finished comprehending it, he sent the original copy to the Red Cloud Cave to be used to suppress the human race's fortune. The Tao De Sutra, which had already absorbed a lot of power of virtue, transformed into a supreme treasure of human virtue. Although Mosquito Daoren had only recited the Tao De Sutra, Lin Yuan's celestial slaying sword formation was not the real deal. In order to break through the defenses of the Tao De Sutra, it was not difficult to understand why he would expend a lot of incense. Furthermore, once he killed Mosquito Daoren, wouldn't the 4 immortal slaying swords and the immortal slaying sword formation truly fall into his hands? This might be a small loss, but the benefits were indeed quite significant. Words are not good, but words of praise are not good. Those who are kind do not argue, but those who argue are not good. Mosquito Daoren was still reciting the Tao De Sutra. Lin Yuan, who had read the contents of the Tao De Sutra in his past life, could vaguely remember that Mosquito Daoren had already reached the end of the book. If his guess was correct, once he finished reciting the entire book, it would definitely be the time for Mosquito Daoren to counterattack. Chapter 11:10. The Way of Heaven, Benefits but Not Harms. The Way of the Sage, for the sake of not fighting. Lin Yuan did not know how much content was in the Tao Te Ching written by the Taishang Shu. Most of the books circulating in the future were missing due to various reasons such as natural disasters and man-made disasters. Many of the books even had monster-like existences. However, when he heard Mosquito Daoren's words, the Tao Te Ching that Lin Yuan knew had already ended. Moreover, these two sentences carried an inexplicable power. Translated into plain words, it meant that the law of nature was to let everything benefit without harming them. The sage's code of conduct should be to not compete with others in everything he did. If there was no mythological background, there would be no problem with this sentence according to the above understanding. However, with the mythological background, these two sentences were equivalent to completely denying Hong Jun. People only knew that the destined 6 sages became heavenly sages after being bestowed with the Hong Meng immortal qi by Hong Jun. They had to respectfully address Hong Jun as their teacher. However, if they did not participate in this grand scheme, who would have thought that the so-called destined 6 sages were just prisoners and dolls? They had been thinking about how to escape and overthrow Hong Jun's rule from the beginning to the end. The moment the Taishang Shu wrote the Tao Te Ching, it was tantamount to declaring war on Hong Jun. After these two sentences were read, the endless power of morality suddenly appeared from all directions and supported Mosquito Daoren's body. In the tide of the power of morality, the Sen Luo demonic region created by Lin Yuan was as fragile as a piece of white paper. It was easily torn apart and the real world was revealed again. Lin Yuan's face suddenly turned pale and a look of horror flashed across his eyes. This Sen Luo demonic region was not a small trick. As the world was getting closer and closer to completion, he condensed a piece of underworld soil with the help of the underworld black water. Every inch of land required more than 50 kilograms of underworld black water. If he wanted to condense an inch of underworld soil without carrying out a large-scale massacre, Lin Yuan would have to work day and night for 3 full days to condense a piece of underworld soil. This piece of underworld soil combined the power of the underworld river that Lin Yuan currently controlled with the power of the Hungry Ghost Path and the Azura Path's reincarnation power. He even borrowed many characteristics of the law of space from the willow branch that ancestor Yang Mei had given him. This was how he created the Sen Luo demonic region. However, Mosquito Daoren had only read the Tao Te Ching once and directly broke his 3 Luo Ching. If he wanted to create another piece of Luo demonic region, he would have to start. Amazing. Lin Yuan took a deep breath, calmed down his mood, and praised from the bottom of his heart. The Tao Te Ching deserved to be called a merit treasure. For the first time, he truly felt the gap between himself and the real big shots in the untainted land. However, Lin Yuan was not discouraged. After all, the Tao Te Ching was a merit treasure. With the help of the Tao Te Ching, it was very easy for it to break his Sen Luo demonic region. If it could not break it, Lin Yuan would have to think about what went wrong. Now the heaven martial world had not completed the 3 realms and 6 paths. Lin Yuan could only imitate a similar power. When the world was completed, his Sen Luo demonic region would naturally be supported by the power of the world. He dared not say that he would be recognized by the Great Way, but he would really become the underworld of the heaven martial world. At that time, not to mention the Tao Te Ching, even the Tao Te Ching would not necessarily be able to destroy this underworld. Many people would combine the netherworld and the netherworld together. In fact, it was different. The netherworld was just the layout of the Western sect. It combined the rules that existed in the netherworld to create a set of reincarnation processes. There were 5 types of immortals: heaven, earth, man, ghost and god. Among them, ghost immortals were the weakest. In a sense, the netherworld was a subordinate unit. Normally speaking, when the underworld was mentioned, practically everyone's first reaction would be the underworld. This was because the legends of the 10 kings of hell and the 18 levels of hell were too widespread. This caused many people to think that the underworld was referring to the underworld. But in fact, The netherworld was just a government office built in the underworld. Fengdu, Mount Tai, and the netherworld corresponded to the Tao of the Tao Te Ching, the god of Haotian, and the Buddhism of the Western religious sect respectively. They divided the position of the Saint of Earth and completely restricted Empress Pingxin. Anyone who knew a little about the netherworld knew that the Lord of Mount Tai had always been a mysterious existence. The ones who really fought fiercely in the underworld were Divine Ti, Yulei, the ghost emperors of 5 directions, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, and the 10 kings of hell, who represented the Tao Te Ching and the Buddhism Te Ching. After all, although the Lord of Mount Tai was backed by the heavenly court, all the immortals in the heavenly court, except for the heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals formed by the great cultivators who were ranked on the immortal list, all the immortals in the heavenly court had a backer. When they gave Haotian face, they would call him God or Great Emperor. When they didn't give him face, they wouldn't listen to him. How could Haotian really ignore their feelings and forcibly activate the list of deification to control these immortals? Even worse, Sanqing's incarnations like the Lord of the Tao Te Ching and the Lord of Lingbao served in the heavenly court. Haotian could only coax and worship them. Even if Hong Jun was dragged out, Haotian had to call them senior brothers. The weakness of the heavenly court was not a matter of a day or two. It was said that the Lord of Mount Tai was the first successor to the throne of the Earth Empress. In other words, if Empress Pingxin suddenly died one day, the Lord of Mount Tai could take over the throne of the Earth Empress, who controlled the netherworld and samsara. However, in fact, not to mention whether there was any succession in the untainted world, Empress Pingxin was invincible in the netherworld and was an invincible sage. Lin Yuan really couldn't think of any accident that could kill Empress Pingxin. If such a thing really happened, the netherworld would be plowed by the plow. How could the Lord of Mount Tai live alone? Therefore, the Lord of Mount Tai was not really mysterious. From the perspective of the weakness of the heavenly court, this branch of the underworld only needed to take care of its own affairs. At the same time, it was responsible for communicating with Empress Pingxin and supervising the struggle between the underworld and the underworld of Fengdu. It was to ensure that neither side would do anything too excessive. Otherwise, if Empress Pingxin was angry, no one would have a good ending. To put it in a more humble way, the underworld of Mount Tai did not have the ability to compete with the Buddhist and Taoist sects for who was the head of the underworld. To put it in a more grandiose way, the underworld of Mount Tai was established by the heavenly court to mediate and judge the struggle between the Buddhist and Taoist sections. There were many people who caused trouble in the underworld, especially in the netherworld. It could be said that it was plagued with disasters. However, there were not many who caused trouble in the netherworld. Even if there were, they would not have a good ending. The Tianwu world did not have the 5 major systems of heaven, earth, man, ghost and god. If the netherworld was established, Lin Yuan would be in a state of supremacy. Chapter 11:11. Black Jiao. Your realm of ghosts has been broken. What else do you have? Just use it. Mosquito Daoran looked at the Black Jiao seriously. He held the handle of his spear with one hand and pointed the sharp spearhead to the ground. Lin Yuan did not take over the conversation. Although Mosquito Daoran had broken the realm of ghosts by reciting the Tao Te Ching, he did not attack immediately. Instead, he signaled for Lin Yuan to continue attacking. Under such circumstances, if Lin Yuan continued to be aggressive, he would inevitably be at a disadvantage. In fact, Mosquito Daoran's behavior was not rare in the untainted world. Some people called it a Tao discussion. In layman's terms, it meant to learn from each other. If Lin Yuan answered, no matter what the result was, if Mosquito Daoran died in his hands, it would be his fault. In the future, when the world was repaired or he entered the untainted world, the Grand Supreme, Xuandu, Taoism, and the mighty figures of the human sect would have plenty of excuses to find trouble with him. Because this was a learning from each other, not a life and death battle. Mosquito Daoran, I respect you as a senior. Today, I can leave you a whole corpse. I will accept this karma. After pondering for a moment, Lin Yuan's eyes suddenly flashed with a cold light. He said jokingly, Senior, have you forgotten why you came all the way to this spirit space? Now you think I am difficult to deal with and want to find an excuse to get rid of me. Do you really think I am a fool? Surnamed Lin? Mosquito Daoran was shocked. He had expected that Lin Yuan would refuse his request for a Tao discussion. However, he did not expect that the Black Jiao in front of him was surnamed Lin. Although he did not know the growth path of this Black Jiao, He was sure that the dragon bloodline in his body was very pure. Although he was only a flood dragon, in terms of bloodline density, he was not inferior to the dragons of the ancestral dragon's generation, but compared to the dragons of the four seas in today's untainted world, he was probably not inferior to a true dragon. With such a pure bloodline, Mosquito Dowrin wouldn't be surprised even if this Black Jiao told him that it was the son of some prehistoric almighty being. But this Black Jiao's surname was not Ao. Mosquito Doran's lips curled into a sinister grin. Me? Good, good, good. It seems like you, the Black Jiao, are really lucky. But that's fine, since you are not of the dragon race's bloodline, I won't have to worry about the Ao clan's revenge anymore. The bloodline of the Four Seas Dragon Clan? Suddenly, the Heavenly Gate Guardians who were watching the battle were shocked. They looked at Lin Yuan and Mosquito Dowrin with fear in their eyes. The fact that the Black Jiao was not a native of the Qianwu world was something that had been determined since a long time ago. This was because the Black Jiao was an existence that appeared out of thin air. Even if the various forces tried their best, they still couldn't find the birthplace and clan of the Black Jiao. How could an existence that could cultivate to the limit of the Qianwu world be a fool? It was just that no one had brought this matter to the surface. Even the matter of the reincarnation of the Demon Emperor was just a joke. Not to mention the great cultivators on the human side, even the demon beasts of the desolate demon realm were unwilling to enter the cycle of reincarnation. They would prepare a grotto heaven and leave behind countless backup plans. Even if they successfully completed their reincarnation, it was normal for them to not appear in the world for decades. After all, anyone in the cultivation world could be said to have enemies everywhere. Even if there was no hatred, it was naturally excellent to have one less cultivation resource. Therefore, once they appeared in the world, they would be almost as strong as when they were at their peak. For example, although Yang Qinglin of the Blood God sect successfully completed his reincarnation, if it wasn't for Lin Yuan's strong rise in the northern frontier and his suppression of the sects, who knew when this ancient cultivator would appear in public? A reincarnation of the Demon Emperor of the Spirit Awakening realm. Wouldn't it be a joke? However, Lin Yuan had indeed pulled the tiger skin well back then and displayed the deterrence of the ancient demon court to the extreme. After all, those who were not powerful could not defeat Lin Yuan, and those powerful figures were very clear about one thing. The ancient demon court was not destroyed. Instead, it disintegrated on its own for some reason and disappeared in the long river of history. Now, the top figures among the guardians of the heavenly gates were most likely small fries in the era when the ancient demon court was active. These small fries had become big shots and lived until now. Who could guarantee that the experts of the ancient demon court had fallen? Therefore, under the premise that there were no huge benefits, indeed, no one was willing to offend Lin Yuan. After that, Lin Yuan rose in the northern frontier and established the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Although it attracted the attention of some people, they did not get much benefit. The Black Jiao pulled out a background that seemed to be even more terrifying than the ancient demon court in the Endless Sea. Moreover, there were indeed experts from other worlds who came to suppress all enemies for Lin Yuan. In a short 3 minutes, it was enough to scare these big shots who were used to being at ease. However, where Lin Yuan came from and how powerful the forces behind him were still unsolved mysteries. There were experts from the outside world who entered the Sky Martial world to deal with Lin Yuan. This could be said to be unexpected, but it was also reasonable. The natives of the Sky Martial world did not know how vast the various worlds were, but only a small number of people could obtain the cultivation resources of any world. This was an ecological environment that could not be avoided in any world. Therefore, the more powerful the forces behind Lin Yuan were, the more enemies he would have. This was something that could not be avoided. For example, the cultivators of the Sky Martial world, whether it was the imperial court, sect or aristocratic family, there were many conflicts between them. However, in the end, there were almost no deep hatred between them. 99% of them were for resources and benefits, and there were very few boring disputes over face. However, now it seemed that the background of the dragon race of the Four Seas was not simple. The Endless Sea was originally ruled by the whale race. With the appearance of the dragon race of the Four Seas, and after a long period of war, the powerful whale race was killed and expelled. The overlord of the Endless Sea was changed to the dragon race of the Four Seas. This was something that everyone knew, but no one knew where the powerful dragon race of the Four Seas came from. They only knew that when they appeared, they had the strength to contend with the overlords of the Endless Sea and the natives. After reproducing for so many years, the the dragon bloodline demonic beasts became nobles among the demonic beasts. However, it was also a fact that the throne of the dragon race of the four seas was not stable. Not to mention the demonic beasts and the various sea demon clans in the Endless Sea. Even the guardians of the Heavenly Gate wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to bite off a piece of fat meat from the Endless Sea. However, when the young man in the blood-red robe finished speaking, immediately many people gave up on this idea. When they looked at the Endless Sea, there was a faint trace of fear. Chapter 11-12. Although the two cultivators from the outside world who were dressed like generals were suppressed by the Scarlet Gourd as soon as they entered the arena, the Heavenly Gate guardians who had a little bit of eyesight could see that the other party's strength was definitely not inferior to the top among them. Moreover, the purity and quality of the energy was far above theirs. The moment they stepped out of the Heavenly Gate, their faces revealed looks of disdain. Obviously, they came from a world that was countless times stronger than the Tianwu world. That was to be expected. These guys were here to deal with the Black Jiao. The Black Jiao's background was mysterious and it was definitely far beyond their expectations. This was because the forces in the Tianwu world were not completely ignorant of the myriad of worlds. For example, the Wandering Immortal Sect was a powerful force that had established branches in various worlds. However, the top experts they knew did not dare to say that they could casually cross over to any world and still maintain the ability to crush everything. However, the experts summoned by the Black Jiao could obviously do that. Therefore, these guys who came to look for trouble with the Black Jiao, even if their backgrounds were inferior to the Black Jiao's, they were still far stronger than the Tianwu world. However, even such existences were vaguely afraid of the dragon race of the Four Seas and the revenge of the Ao clan. One had to know that even in the Tianwu world, the direct descendants of the dragon race of the Four Seas also called themselves Ao. Good guy. One of the desolate demon realm's dragon race who was secretly watching the battle suddenly smiled happily. He could not suppress the pride on his face. Just watching a show and he found himself a powerful backer? This was a huge gain. I have no relationship with the Ao clan. It can even be said that I have no relationship with the forces over there. Therefore, you don't have to worry that after killing me, they will take revenge on you. However, the prerequisite is that... Lin Yuan narrowed his eyes slightly and said mockingly, "You can really kill me." Hearing this, the mosquito Daorin narrowed his eyes slightly. Because in his opinion, Lin Yuan's words were indeed too arrogant. Not to mention that Lin Yuan was only a person from the ancient era. Even in the chaotic world, other than the gods like Yang Mei and Hong Jun, there were not many existences that had lived longer than him. The so-called 5 primordial ferocious insects were all tainted with the primordial qi left behind by Pan Gu. Those like him who had sealed themselves and did not appear in the world again were not well known. However, he did not believe that Lin Yuan had not heard of the others. In the Journey to the West Calamity, the number 1 was the main character of the Journey to the West drama, the golden cicada who was sent into the samsara by Tathagata and reincarnated as Tang Sanzang. Because of the series of dramas in the Journey to the West, many people might think that the Tang Sanzang who went to the West to retrieve the Buddhist scriptures was the gentle and polite white-faced monk in the dramas. However, before his reincarnation, the golden cicada was infamous in the chaotic world. His original form was a golden cicada with 6 pairs of thin wings on his back. He looked harmless but he had a huge appetite. Every primitive creature that met the golden cicada would become his food. In addition, the golden cicada's mortal body was indestructible. Not to mention ordinary magical weapons. Even divine fire and divine lightning couldn't hurt him at all. In the Journey to the West, there was a famous scene where Tang Sanzang beat the White Bone Demon 3 times. Because the monkey had beaten the White Bone Demon's human form many times with his stick, Tang Sanzang was finally disliked and drove away. However, before his reincarnation, Tang Sanzang had killed many more people than the monkey. Moreover, although the monkey was a demon, he had never eaten a human. On the contrary, in his previous life, Tang Sanzang, who was full of mercy, had eaten many innocent souls. In the Journey to the West, some people said that the golden cicada was sent into the samsara to be reincarnated as Tang Sanzang because he and the Tathagata had different views on Buddhism. However, in fact, the reason why the golden cicada was chosen was that the Tathagata wanted to wear down the golden cicada's fierceness. As for the monkey, it was just a show to the Grand Supreme and the others. After removing some artistic embellishments, the truth was so cruel. In the Journey to the West, there was also the 100-eyed Demon King, who was also one of the 5 great ferocious insects, the multi-eyed golden centipede. Once the 100 eyes on its back opened, it could emit an infinite amount of golden light. It could break all kinds of dhamma in the world and could transform into an immortal body. Like the golden cicada, it was also sent to the Western sect and cultivated into the 1,000-eyed 1,000-hand Buddha. There was nothing much to say about the Holy Dragon King's son-in-law, the 9-headed insect. It was also one of the 81 tribulations and its strength was not below that of the monkey. In the end, the monkey was forced to invite Yang Jian. The two of them worked together to kill one of the 9-headed insect. In the end, the 9-headed insect escaped. The other one was more powerful. It was the 9-tailed scorpion. She had listened to the Tathagata's preaching in the spirited mountain. She accidentally stung the Tathagata and broke his Zhang's 6 golden body. It was so painful that the Tathagata could not preach in peace for thousands of years. Even when the Western sect worked together to capture her, she still managed to escape from the spirited mountain. It was obvious that her poison was strong and her methods were powerful. Although the mosquito Daoren was not famous, he could be called the 5 ferocious insects of the primordial world with the other 4. Whether it was in terms of experience or methods, he was not inferior at all. Although he felt that Lin Yuan was difficult to deal with, it was only in this world. If he returned to the untainted world, the mosquito Daoren would go all out. Even if he could not defeat the existence of the sage realm, he was confident that he could escape unscathed from the opponent if he encountered an ordinary sage to be. Now that he was looked down upon by Lin Yuan, an inexplicable anger rose in the mosquito Daoren. All right, then let this poor Taoist have a taste of your abilities. The mosquito Daoren shouted angrily, but his body suddenly exploded. In an instant, a deafening buzzing sound had already spread out. Even the surrounding guardians of the heavenly gate who had cultivated successfully could not help but feel their scalps go numb. Looking at the blood-winged black mosquitoes that covered the sky turned into a black tide and surrounded Lin Yuan, it was as if they had already seen Lin Yuan's shriveled corpse. Back and forth, it's still the same 2 moves. When Lin Yuan saw that the mosquito Daoren had once again turned into a swarm of mosquitoes, he immediately spoke sarcastically. However, he did not dare to be careless at all. After all, the most sensitive organ of snakes was their sense of smell. As long as he moved his nose, he could smell a strong and almost choking smell of blood. It was as if what was in front of him was not countless blood-winged black mosquitoes, but the netherworld blood sea that countless powerful people would shrink back at the sight of. Turning into a swarm of mosquitoes was one of the abilities that the mosquito Daoren was best at. When he had killed the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit, he had used this method. Previously, he had wanted to use a similar method to deal with Lin Yuan, but Lin Yuan had blocked him with the netherworld black water. He had even killed many of the blood-winged black mosquitoes that had flown towards him. But now, Lin Yuan's different colored eyes kept moving because he could not tell at all where the mosquito Daoren's real body was hiding. It was as if every blood-winged black mosquito was the real body of the mosquito Daoren, and it was as if every blood-winged black mosquito was a trick that he had released. Chapter 11:13. Mosquito Daoren can create billions of clones. His real body could be hiding in the swarm, waiting for an opportunity to attack me. It's also possible that all of this is a smokescreen. Mosquito Daoren's real body is hiding in the void, just like what he did at the beginning, waiting for me to reveal a flaw. Lin Yuan narrowed his eyes slightly and quickly dismissed the distracting thoughts, coming up with the 2 most probable conclusions. The 5 ferocious primordial bugs were very powerful, but in Lin Yuan's eyes, they were just other than Mosquito Daoren, who disappeared after being sealed as a god, all of them became the whetstones prepared by Tathagata for the golden cicada master. Mosquito Daoren's cultivation was now suppressed to the Demon King realm in the Tianwu world. He could only rely on the mana cultivated in the Eldritch world and the Abhijna that surpassed the Tianwu world system to fight. However, in terms of mana, Lin Yuan controlled the power of incense. With more than 300 million incense, how could he not be able to defeat Mosquito Daoren? In terms of Abhijna, Lin Yuan had the system behind him. Even if he followed the Abhijna that he came up with in the novels in his previous life, it would be useless. He could connect to the system at any time and find a suitable Abhijna from the myriad worlds to turn into a skill. More importantly, Lin Yuan had already pushed Mosquito Daoren to such an extent. Today, one of them would definitely die. Lin Yuan was not worried that Mosquito Daoren would run away. After all, although he was now facing Lin Yuan, the one who really wanted to kill Mosquito Daoren was the Shangqing Heavenly Lord. If Mosquito Daoren fought with Lin Yuan, the Shangqing Heavenly Lord could only remain silent due to his status as a senior. He could not go out and take sides, right? If he wanted to be involved in this karma, why would he throw the immortal slaying sword formation to Lin Yuan and let Lin Yuan do it? Was it very difficult for Tong Tian to kill a Mosquito Daoren who had left the primitive world? However, if Mosquito Daoren were to use these incarnations to stall Lin Yuan while his real body prepared to escape into the void, even if Shangqing Heavenly Lord didn't do anything, he would directly point out Mosquito Daoren's location and might even help Lin Yuan suppress the swarm of blood-winged black mosquitoes. The most important thing now is not whether I can deal with so many Zergs, but that I have to find Mosquito Daoren's real body before the Zergs get close. Lin Yuan's eyes burned as he scanned the blood-winged black mosquitoes that were approaching from all directions. At the same time, he controlled the Nether Realm's black water to sweep towards them. Head-on and brainless recklessness were two different things. Lin Yuan didn't mind fighting to the death with Mosquito Daoren. Even without the reward of the immortal slaying sword formation, Mosquito Daoren came to the Qianwu world to kill him. If there was a chance, Lin Yuan didn't plan to let him leave alive. However, the black spear in Mosquito Daoren's hand was the mouthpart of the blood-winged black mosquitoes. It was indeed not to be trifled with. The 12th grade lotus platform was formed from the 4 lotus seeds of the primal chaos green lotus. There were 4 of them. The one that Mosquito Daoren absorbed the tier 3 mana was the 12th grade virtuous golden lotus. Although those bodhisattvas and Buddhas seemed to be sitting on a lotus platform each, they were basically imitations. That was because the 12th grade virtuous golden lotus was a treasure used by the receiving Taoist to suppress the fate of the Western sect. Otherwise, if the tier 3 mana was absorbed by Mosquito Daoren, Buddhism wouldn't have appeared 1,000 years late. Even if a treasure that could suppress the fate of a large sect didn't have an extraordinary origin, it was still an existence that couldn't be underestimated. Lin Yuan didn't feel that his physical body could be compared to the 12th grade virtuous golden lotus at all. Without even trying, Lin Yuan was sure that once his physical body touched Mosquito Daoren's mouthpart, the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit was a classic example. This is troublesome. An obscure radiance flashed across the Shangqing Heavenly Lord's eyes. It wasn't rare for Mosquito Daoren to have billions of clones. Even if his disciple, Turtle Spirit, died under this technique, he could only say that it was an extremely basic technique. It couldn't even reach the threshold of supernatural powers. Most of the insects that obtained this technique knew this technique. They looked like their descendants, but in fact, they were all puppet clones refined by their mother. However, Mosquito Daoren's technique was indeed a little interesting. Mosquito Daoren's real body was hiding in the void, but he didn't show his power. He just followed the swarm of insects and approached Lin Yuan secretly. He was even sure that Lin Yuan had entered Mosquito Daoren's attack range. However, Mosquito Daoren still didn't have the intention to attack. He just commanded his clones to get closer and closer. Obviously, he wanted to continue to close the distance and pursue a one-hit kill, not giving Lin Yuan the slightest chance to fight back. The great Tao of space and the basic technique, coupled with the Mosquito Daoren's mouthpart that could devour anything, it was indeed a little like a supernatural power. If he could use it skillfully, unless he also cultivated the great Tao of space, or he was born with unusually sharp senses, Mosquito Daoren would definitely end up with a one-hit kill in the same realm. I don't know if this Black Jiao can take it. Shangqing Heavenly Lord reached out and touched his chin. His handsome face was still smiling, and there was no emotion of seeing an enemy at all. Lin Yuan's answer was, he could take it. The swarm of blood-winged black mosquitoes looked almost exactly the same. Even if Lin Yuan activated the Eye of God, he couldn't distinguish which one was Mosquito Daoren's real body from the details. However, after trying all kinds of methods, Lin Yuan didn't get feedback from the system. Instead, it was the willow branch that Yang Mei gave to him. The emerald green willow branch kept spinning in Lin Yuan's sea of consciousness. It fixed and pointed in a certain direction. When Lin Yuan looked in that direction, it didn't take long for the willow branch to continue spinning until it fixed again. Obviously, it was guiding Lin Yuan to Mosquito Daoren's position. He's really hiding in the void. A cold light flashed in Lin Yuan's eyes. Among the great Taos, fate, time, and space could be said to be the most difficult to deal with. They could be said to be invincible among those of the same level. This was because the divine abilities and spells derived from these 3 great Taos were rarely seen by others. They were all existences that could unknowingly take the enemy's life. It was hard to say what level Mosquito Doran's comprehension of the great Tao of space had reached. However, Tianwu world was after all a small world. If one had to make an analogy, it was a world that was stronger than the setting of wind and cloud. However, it wasn't that much stronger. Even if Mosquito Doran knew divine abilities like so close, yet worlds apart, this world couldn't let him use them. Therefore, Mosquito Doran could only use the stupid method of hiding his real body in the void and slowly approaching Lin Yuan. Then, he would wait for an opportunity to make his move. However, using the great Tao of space in front of Ancestor Yang Mei was like playing with a knife in front of a master. Lin Yuan hadn't comprehended much of the great Tao of space from the willow branch. However, against an existence like Mosquito Doran, when holding the willow branch, the methods he comprehended from the great Tao of space were completely useless in front of Lin Yuan. Chapter 11:14. Mosquito Doran, who was hiding in the void, changed his position several times as he gloomily stared at Lin Yuan. He was completely unable to understand why this black Jiao's senses were so sharp. As long as he stayed in one direction for more than 3 breaths, he would immediately be sensed by the black Jiao. This forced him to not care about the consumption of his energy. He could only madly activate the great Tao of space, causing himself to constantly change directions in order to inch closer to the black Jiao. But this way, his plan would be completely disrupted. The spiritual energy in the Tianwu world was extremely turbid. It could not be directly used to replenish Fa Li. It had to be refined and then constantly remove the impurities within the spiritual energy. Only then could it be absorbed. According to the system's data, if Mosquito Doran wanted to replenish 1 unit of Fa Li, he would need to extract 10 units of spiritual energy. Furthermore, of the replenished Fa Li, about a third would be used for purification. Even worse, because of Lin Yuan's constant glances, Mosquito Doran did not even have the time to extract the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. He was practically gritting his teeth as he approached Lin Yuan. Therefore, according to this consumption, when he reached Lin Yuan's side, he would have to explode with his strongest attack. Because his remaining Fa Li was simply not enough to support him in the void while waiting for the right opportunity. Suddenly, large swarms of blood-winged black mosquitoes seemed to have gone crazy. They flapped their wings and accelerated towards Lin Yuan. Lin Yuan's eyes did not have the slightest ripple. He only slowly opened his mouth and spat out a large amount of nether-realm black water, which melted with the blood-winged black mosquitoes like a black tide. At this moment, a cold light shone behind Lin Yuan. A blood-winged black mosquito actually drilled out of the void and fiercely slammed into Lin Yuan's defenseless back. A diversion. I guessed it. Lin Yuan's lazy voice sounded. Layers of black nether realm water formed a mirror behind Lin Yuan. The blood-winged black mosquito courageously smashed through 6 layers of water shields, almost stabbing into Lin Yuan's flesh. Only then was it melted into water droplets by the 7th layer of water shield. Those blood-winged black mosquitoes that were flapping their wings and making deafening buzzing sounds seemed to have lost their command. Some continued to attack Lin Yuan, who seemed to have let out a sigh of relief. Some froze in place as though they had lost their souls. That's it? In an instant, many of the Heavenly Gate Guardians who were watching the battle had a look of ridicule in their eyes. He had thought that this guy who dared to cross worlds to find trouble with the Black Jiao would be very powerful. In the end, he was like a silver spear with a wax head. He didn't even touch the Black Jiao before he was punished. Are you here to be funny? Right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. Another beam of cold light broke through the shackles of the void. A blood-winged black mosquito charged towards Lin Yuan from the opposite direction. Ah, I've caught you. However, Lin Yuan had already turned his head the moment the blood-winged black mosquito charged out of the void. He gloomily stared at the Mosquito Doran's main body. He did not have much understanding of the space Tao. After all, his natural endowments were there for all to see. Even cultivating step by step was fraught with difficulties, let alone understanding the space Tao. Even the space Tao that he had used to create the limitless demon was borrowed from the willow branch. He had simply copied it. This allowed his limitless demon to have the effect of sealing space. As for relying on himself to sense the location of the Mosquito Doran's main body, Lin Yuan did not have this thought at all. Wouldn't it be foolish not to use a treasure when there was one? From the very beginning, Lin Yuan knew that the blood-winged black mosquito that had launched a sneak attack from the void was not the main body. It was a smokescreen that the Mosquito Doran had used to confuse him. He wanted to force him to use his trump card, and Lin Yuan had indeed done so. As expected, the moment he used this trump card, the mosquito Doran's main body was immediately shaken out. After all, the consumption of the mosquito Doran's series of actions was not low to begin with. After being forced by Lin Yuan's gaze twice and even preparing a smokescreen, the consumption had reached a new level. Now, the mosquito Doran could really be said to be going all out. With a thought, a willow branch flew out of Lin Yuan's mouth and crashed straight into the mosquito Doran. Immediately, the world was directly isolated and sealed. The willow branch that the patriarch of Yangmei had given him had actually imprisoned the mosquito Doran. This was not Lin Yuan's limitless demonic domain. This was a willow branch plucked from the patriarch of Yangmei's main body. What kind of existence was the patriarch of Yangmei? One of the primordial innate god fiends, the hollow willow, and the carrier of rules. It could be said that the patriarch of Yangmei was the manifestation of the great Tao of space. Once these innate god fiends were born with consciousness, their strength was not inferior to that of a Chaos Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal. Obviously, this was because they were born as saints of the great Tao. It could be said that the moment these manifestations of rules were born, they stood at the end of the line in the eyes of countless cultivators and monsters in the universe. To be honest, toying with the great Tao of space in front of the patriarch of Yangmei was an act of courting death. This meant that the mosquito Doran was targeting Lin Yuan, and the patriarch of Yangmei was a very casual person. Otherwise, if Lin Yuan had killed the two fox demons sent by the patriarch of Yangmei, he would have killed Lin Yuan instead of bestowing the willow branch. Therefore, now that the mosquito Doran had attacked Lin Yuan, and the patriarch of Yangmei had no intention of attacking either, Lin Yuan could only use the willow branch to locate the mosquito Doran. However, in a battle between experts, unless there was an absolute suppression of power, even the slightest difference would bring about an irreversible change in the battle. The mosquito Doran had too much faith in his great Tao of space. Even when he was discovered by Lin Yuan at the beginning, he only thought that Lin Yuan's perception was extraordinary. Therefore, if he stayed in a certain void for too long, he would be directly detected by Lin Yuan. However, he did not expect that he was now like a turtle in a jar, being clearly arranged by the willow branch. A fake attack in the opposite direction? Sorry, but the willow branch had been pointing at the real mosquito Doran. The situation was reversed again. Immediately, many of the Heavenly Gate Guardians opened their mouths, but not a word came out. There was no other way. It was 2F** King embarrassing. Previously, they had thought that since this group of people dared to cross worlds to find trouble with the Black Jiao, they would definitely not be easy to deal with. In the end, the two guys who were dressed like generals acted like experts and refused to communicate with the Black Jiao. In the end, the Black Jiao only threw out a red gourd, and the two of them were completely subdued. Later on, when the young man in the blood-red robe attacked, the night market gasped in amazement. After all, no one had sensed that such an existence was hiding in the void not far away. In the end, the Black Jiao did not hide at all. He attacked again and again, but failed every time. Chapter 11:15. He had turned into a swarm of mosquitoes again and again. Originally, they thought that he would play some tricks this time. However, when he turned his head, it was just a feint. His real body could not be hidden from the Black Jiao's eyes. Now, not only was the Black Jiao unharmed, this guy even lost his own life. Brother, are you sure you are here to make trouble for the Black Jiao? Are you trying to make a fool out of yourself with your actions? However, after the banter, these Heavenly Gate Guardians once again realized that the Black Jiao's strength and foundation were probably much more terrifying than their previous evaluation. However, no one noticed that Lin Yuan's eyes flashed with a hint of relief. After all, facing the existence of the untainted world directly was not something that these people who had never heard of the untainted world could imagine. Not to mention the mosquito Doran's law of space. Just his innate divine ability that could devour everything was enough to make Lin Yuan fearful. From the beginning, the battle strategy he had chosen was to avoid a head-on collision with the mosquito Doran. This was also thanks to the existence of the black water in the nether realm, which caused him to not want to touch the mosquito Doran, and the mosquito Doran was not willing to touch him. Otherwise, there would be no room for maneuver. If the battlefield was in the untainted world, the mosquito Doran, who could make Kundi and Jane suffer losses, would probably be able to kill Lin Yuan in an instant. But even so, the mosquito Doran was definitely an invincible existence in the Qianwu world. This was because there was absolutely no movement in the world that could be compared with the law of space. In those novels, when the body movement was deduced to the extreme, it could only give rise to shrinking Earth into an inch so close yet so far and so on. However, this kind of divine ability still used a large amount of the law of space as the foundation to support it. What was the battle record of the mosquito Daoren at his peak? In the Battle of the 10,000 Immortals formation, he killed the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit. Then, he flapped his wings and went to the Western Paradise to eat the 12th grade virtuous Golden Lotus. What was this? This was the use of the laws of space. Sun Wukong could travel 108,000 li with a single somersault. Whether or not he could leave the Dongsheng Divine Continent would depend on where he somersaulted, let alone the Western Pure Land. This was the gap between them. In a situation where they didn't have any means to keep the mosquito Daoren in check, it could be said that anyone who came into contact with the mosquito Daoren would die. After all, once they came into contact with the mosquito Daoren's mandibles, they would be sucked dry. Moreover, among the existences that Lin Yuan was wary of, mosquito Daoren was not at the forefront. Hongjuan's generation wouldn't be so shameless as to personally deal with the current him. Or perhaps it could be said that they didn't have the confidence to kill him in the heaven martial world after clashing with the will of the world and the system. So before he went to the great desolate world to face these big shots, the only ones he had to be careful of were their disciples. But among these people, the only one who could really make Lin Yuan unable to fight back was Shen Gongbao. In other words, Shen Gongbao was sent to the investiture of the gods during the investiture of the gods cataclysm. Otherwise, with Shen Gongbao's skills, if he could successfully become a Chaos Daluo Golden Immortal, let alone Lin Yuan, even existences like Hongjun and Yang Mei would have to be wary of him. Shen Gongbao and Jiang Zia were both disciples of the primeval Lord of Heaven. But the interesting thing was that Shen Gongbao cultivated the Great Tao of Karma. The Great Tao of Karma was definitely one of the best among the 3,000 Great Taos. It was even one of the few existences that could compete with the Great Tao of Fate. Of course, in terms of status, fate was still higher than karma. What was karma? To put it simply, it was to return what one borrowed. For example, Lin Yuan had borrowed the tiger skin of the ancient demon court before, so there was karma between the two. That was why Red Cloud Taoist dared to appear in the Boundless Sea and ask Lin Yuan to repay this karma. Without this relationship, unless the day when the world was repaired, the experts hiding in the dark would naturally fight with each other. Otherwise, Lin Yuan would not necessarily know the existence of these untainted bigwigs who hid him, even until his death. However, the prerequisite of karma was intersection. Only when there was intersection, there would be karma, and only then could people use such a chain of karma. Why was the status of fate higher than karma? Because fate never required two parties to have intersection. The so-called destiny was like this. Some people did things and the results they suffered were all arranged by fate from the beginning. At the same time, fate was also the most mysterious and ethereal Great Tao. No matter how hard Lin Yuan thought, he could not think of a few people who cultivated the Great Tao of Fate. If he had to insist, the so-called Great Tao of Fate should be the way of heaven. 30% was destiny, and 70% was hard work. No words would appear in this world without a reason. However, after thinking about it, Lin Yuan's fear of Shen Gongbao lessened a little. After all, even though Shen Gongbao was a disciple of the heavenly Lord Yuanshi, he was one of the few outliers in the Chanism. He ignored the consequences of entering the cultivation tribulations without permission and helped Dxin to stabilize the Shang dynasty. He was also considered loyal and had recruited many capable people for the Shang dynasty. Without Shen Gongbao, even though the Shang dynasty would not collapse, its time of existence would be greatly shortened. Shen Gongbao had indeed fought to his death for the Shang dynasty. Without talking about the mythical background, the difference between Shen Gongbao and Jiang Zia was obvious. Both of them were citizens of the Shang dynasty. Everything they learned came from the Shang dynasty. They ate the rice and drank the water of the Shang dynasty. Jiang Zia was a member of the Empress Jiang family of Dxin. However, he did not hesitate to betray the country and seek refuge with Shi Qi, which was known as never close the door at night, never pick up lost things on the road. However, this was just a later modification. In fact, Shi Qi was poor. If there was no door, how could one close the door? If there was no food at night, what could be lost? Could the Ji family of Shi Qi have a human king? Their ancestral skill was divination and asking for fortune. The so-called King Zhou of Shang dynasty is tyrannical. Feng Ming Shi Qi was just an excuse made up by Zhang Zia. In fact, to put it bluntly, King Zhou's thinking was too advanced. He wanted to highly centralize power and completely abandon the idea that the royal power was given by God. Therefore, Weizi and Xian's two sons who had lost the right to inherit the throne joined hands with Zhang Zia, the father and son of the Ji family, to rebel. They even chose the time when Xian was conquering the barbarians and the army had not returned. However, they almost failed to defeat the Shang dynasty. It showed how weak these traitors were. In other words, Zhang Zia, who was called warrior sage by some later emperors, felt that he was old and dying. If he did not rebel against the Shang dynasty, he would die of old age. Then what he had learned would be in vain. Therefore, he did not care about Ji Chang's ominous divination, and directly started the rebellion with Ji Chang. If Xian's brothers and sons were not traitors, this ominous divination was indeed correct. Chapter 11:16. Xian. Lin Yuan's eyes flashed with a cold light. Lin Yuan, who had the mindset of a modern person, did not admire many ancient people. Especially in the field of emperors, there were many useless people. Most of them were raised like pigs by the officials. For example, Emperor Taizong of Tang, who was called the Emperor of the Ages by countless people, was a typical example of someone who was completely controlled by the officials. At the end of the Sui dynasty, the population was around 8-9 million, with an average of 5 people per household. However, at the beginning of the Tang dynasty, the population was only around 2 million. Many people said that it was because Yang Guang did not manage the country well and was ruthless, causing the population to decrease greatly. However, the funny thing was that according to the historical records, the 2 emperors of the Sui dynasty, starting from Emperor Wan of Sui, had been investigating the escapees, and the population had always been increasing. During Yang Guang's reign, it had reached a small peak. Not to mention Yang Guang's great achievement of opening the Grand Canal and bringing 2 economic centers to China. Just the money and food he had accumulated was enough for the people of the beginning of the Tang dynasty to eat for 50 years without even working. In the history of the dynasties, no one was richer than the Sui dynasty. Was this the actions of an incapable ruler? How far did the Sui dynasty and Tang dynasty have to go to such an extent to be able to wipe out tens of millions of people? Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty, who was known as the Emperor of the Han dynasty, had almost completely emptied the savings of the Wan and Jing emperors. In the northern expedition to the Xiongnu dynasty, the Han dynasty's casualties were only a few 100,000. They had almost wiped out the Xiongnu dynasty and opened up the Silk Road. However, they were still slandered by others as having wiped out half of their household register. Then what should Li Shimin's actions of taking over the Sui dynasty's 8 million people and leaving only 2 million people behind be called? Almost wiping out half of their household register? How many people knew, or were willing to admit, that Li Shimin had been copying Yang Guang's homework? Furthermore, he was not good at copying. Just like how everything in the Han dynasty was taken over from the Qin dynasty, everything in the Tang dynasty was taken over from the Sui dynasty. If not for Yang Guang leaving behind a prosperous foundation for Li Shimin, not to mention the Emperor of the Ages, Li Shimin would not even have a chance to become a wise ruler. This was especially the case for Li Shimin, who revered Confucianism and advocated the rule of the state. He had completely ignored the suppression of the ethnic minorities by those sovereigns who were both Confucian on the outside and Confucian on the inside. He had straightforwardly and efficiently arranged marriages, reparations, books, and technology. In the Treaty of Wei River in the first year of Zhengguan, Li Shimin had forced the Turks to retreat, almost single-handedly scaring off an army of more than 100,000 Turks. But in reality, Li Shimin had been schemed against by the great clans, emptying the national treasury to make these vicious wolves retreat. In this period of 20 days, it could not be said that these nomadic tribes had not offended the people of China. Furthermore, Li Shimin's imperial norms had been criticized by others. It was simply a reversal of history. It advocated enfeoffment and wanted the rulers to give up their power to create a country within a country. This was a typical example of a ruler being controlled by the aristocratic families. Most importantly, in the Tang and Song dynasties, Li Shimin was the role model of all the rulers of the Song dynasty. His name was like thunder to everyone's ears. On the contrary, Li Ji and Wu Zetian, who did not learn from Li Shimin, became the rulers of a generation. Li Ji's dynasty had the largest land area in the Tang dynasty. Wu Zetian was even more impressive. Not counting the Civil War, she had fought 26 wars and won 21 times. Her land area was even larger than Li Ji's. However, this was Wu Zhou and not Li Tang. The biggest difference between the two was that Li Tang was dominated by Xianbei nobles while Wu Zhou was dominated by Han people. In addition to Wu Zetian's series of reforms, it could be said that before Zhu Yuanzhang, she had tied the emperor to the nobles to the emperor to the people. The aristocratic family's methods were almost ineffective against Wu Zetian. They could only madly discredit her after Wu Zhou was destroyed. Looking at the history of his previous world, there were only a few human kings that could make Lin Yuan feel deep respect. Other than the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, there was no other than Ying Zheng, Liu Che, Yang Guang, Wu Jiong, and Zhu Yuanzhang. Lin Yuan, who was born as a human, had a natural respect for these human kings. If it weren't for these human kings who risked the destruction of their country time and time again to push the Chinese civilization in the right direction at the nodes of each era, I'm afraid that China wouldn't even be able to enter the 4 ancient civilizations, let alone the existence of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties. As for these human kings, they had left behind endless favors for their descendants. However, almost all of them were labeled as tyrants. The best of them were people who killed people like flies. This was not even counting the human kings with mythological backgrounds. It must be known that even in the mythological world, these human kings had not missed a single thing that they were supposed to do. In Lin Yuan's eyes, even if their merits could not be compared to the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors who enlightened the human race, these human kings were still worthy of the title of emperor. If the human race flourished, these human kings would most likely become human saints. However, regardless of whether it was the Zhangxia of the mythological world or the Zhangxia of the real world, they were all existences that Lin Yuan loathed incomparably. This was a classic example of a traitor who lived off one's family and betrayed another's family. When it came to the Ming dynasty, the great Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang directly carried out the matter of killing saints. First, he killed the second sage Meng Zi, then the martial sage Jiang Shang. Then, he appointed Guan Yu as the new martial sage. In the mythological world, Zhu Yuanzhang had cleanly cut off the source of Meng Zi and Jiang Shang's incense. Thinking of this, Lin Yuan's eyes flashed with a hint of yearning. Then, he heaved a sigh of relief. Yang Guang had been scolded as a tyrant for so many years, but his mistake was that he had lost. He had overestimated the southern aristocratic families at that time, thinking that the Han aristocratic families should work with him to expel the Hu people and take over the mountains and rivers of Han. In the end, his series of reforms made the people with Hu blood in the northern aristocratic families unable to make a living, while he gave the southern aristocratic families tax the southern aristocratic families and supported the southern aristocratic families. However, because of a series of policies that suppressed the aristocratic families, the Han aristocratic families and the southern aristocratic families chose to watch the fire burn across the river, allowing the Guanlong aristocratic family to skin Yang Guang, the human king, alive. This was also the reason why Lin Yuan wanted to suppress the aristocratic families and sects the moment he established the northern frontier. It was because there were not many good people among these people. Even if there were 1 or 2, their clansmen would be the first to stand up and punish them. For example, Xian's brothers, descendants, and the Hongnongyang family behind Yang Guang were all like this. Although Lin Yuan did not have such troubles, there was indeed no need for such a group of people to disgust him in front of him. As he thought, Lin Yuan poured the nether realm's black water into the sealed space. From time to time, he would turn his head and look meaningfully at Hang and Ha. Hang and Ha felt their hair stand on end. However, they did not know that Lin Yuan had no intention of dealing with them. It was hard to say about Mosquito Daoren, but Hang and Ha would definitely not die in the Tianwu world. After all, they were considered the heavenly court's righteous gods. They only had incense tablets. Chapter 11:17. With the existence of incense tablets, it meant that they could use the incense of the thousands of families to rebuild their original source. Of course, it was hard to say whether the 2 generals Hang and Ha that were born from the incense of the thousands of families could be considered as their own. But what did this have to do with the heavenly court and the Western sect? They were only interested in the abilities of the 2 generals Hang and Ha. As long as they were useful, it was fine. After all, they were not the ones who died. But this Mosquito Daoren. Not to mention that Mosquito Daoren had disappeared after the investiture of the gods' cataclysm. Even if Mosquito Daoren had made a name for himself like the two generals Hang and Ha, could it change the situation of his certain death? That was obviously impossible. Don't forget, the one who wanted to kill Mosquito Daoren was never Lin Yuan, but Lord Shangqing, who had been silently watching. After having a certain level of cultivation, death was actually not scary. Unless the world in which the three realms of heaven, earth and man developed harmoniously, there was an existence in the netherworld that no one could afford to offend. Only then would one have to obediently enter the cycle of reincarnation after death. It was not like the three major underworlds in the untainted world, which were just decorations. Not to mention those powerful characters, even ghosts with strong resentment could not be taken away. So what if Empress Pingxin claimed to be invincible in the netherworld? If the 6 heavenly sages came to find her, wouldn't she have to let them go? Ask Empress Pingxin if she dared to directly declare war on the various forces in the untainted world. If Empress Pingxin was alone, she would most likely make Hongjun and the Xian men pay the price at all costs. But speaking of which, Empress Pingxin was never alone. Back then, she was schemed against by Hongjun and turned into the cycle of reincarnation. As a result, the 12 ancestors of sorcerers were unable to set up the great formation of the deities of heaven in the absence of one of them. They could only fight head-on with the demon race. In the end, no one ended up well. The human race who had been hiding in the dark jumped out and created a loophole. Therefore, Empress Pingxin felt guilty towards the sorcerer tribe. Those surviving magi broke into the netherworld and finally found protection from Empress Pingxin. Who would have thought that Empress Pingxin would give up on these magi people and plot against the other gods by any means? If the netherworld didn't have an invincible master overseeing it, or if this master had some scruples, it would evolve into the netherworld of the untainted world. Under normal circumstances, nothing would interfere with the operation of the netherworld. However, when necessary, the reincarnation of the netherworld was nothing. Not to mention the Tathagata, who stuffed the golden cicada into the reincarnation furnace to be reborn, or the Tathagata, who was more ruthless like the Tathagata. He directly let his good corpse incarnation enter the reincarnation cycle and reincarnate into the spring and autumn warring states period, becoming the founder of the Taoist sect. He directly pulled down Hongjun from the altar and completed the transformation from one of the 6 heavenly sages to a sage of the Great Path. He even put the Taoist sect under the command of the Taoist sect and took away the position of the Taoist sect. The 6-soul banner was the ultimate killing move prepared by the Tong Tian sect leader in the Battle of the Innumerable Immortals formation. The person who waved the 6-soul banner would inevitably be swallowed by the remnant thoughts of the 3,000 demonic gods. Even this could be done by the sages, who could take out a bit of the true spirit from the reincarnation cycle to reconstruct the physical body. The price to pay was just to think about what gifts to bring to visit Empress Pingxin and how to act obedient so that Empress Pingxin would be merciful. Like the heaven martial world, where the reincarnation cycle had not been completed. Sorry, it was the same whether it was a human or a ghost. As long as enough backup plans were prepared, they could complete the nirvana rebirth. The so-called reincarnation cycle was almost no different from a decoration. When the physical body was destroyed, the primordial spirit ran away. This was something that the living beings of the untainted land were most familiar with. This was because ever since Pangu created the world, the untainted land was constantly undergoing incomparably cruel battles. Almost every day, there would be the fall of almighty people and the rise of new nobles. These were common occurrences. Therefore, even if Mosquito Daoren did not die in the black water of the nether realm, it was not a big deal. With Shangqing Skylord watching from the side, Lin Yuan really did not believe that Mosquito Daoren could leave the Tianwu world alive. Did he really think that Shangqing Skylord was just a decoration that only knew how to watch the show? More importantly, if it really came to that step, what did killing Mosquito Daoren have to do with Shangqing Skylord? Everyone saw that Mosquito Daoren was no match for Black Jiao in the battle of magical powers and finally died in the hands of Black Jiao. What did he do? He had merely squashed a lost primordial spirit to death. With a thought, Lin Yuan suddenly calmed down and said in his heart, "System, stop pretending to be dead. Weren't you very active when you were lamenting about the Supreme? Come, tell me, where's my Yao core?" The system maintained its silence as usual. Lin Yuan slightly narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "It's fine if you don't say it. But the problem is, do you believe that if you don't say it, I'll ask someone else and they'll tell me? Are you threatening me?" After being mocked by Lin Yuan, the system suddenly showed a line of words. Of course, it knew that the someone else that Lin Yuan was talking about was Hong Jun. If Lin Yuan asked Hong Jun this question, Hong Jun would definitely not hesitate and would immediately tell him what was going on with his Yao core. It would not even make any requests to Lin Yuan. Because in Hong Jun's view, his actions were to drive a wedge between Lin Yuan and it. When the time comes, without this dead end entering the scene, Hong Jun really did not care about the system. This time, the one who remained silent was Lin Yuan. Although he did not reply, the silence at this time was enough to prove Lin Yuan's attitude. You don't think that I took your Yao core and plan to use it to hold you hostage, do you? Is there a problem with you or with me? You're only one step away from the immortal state now. The Yao core is already something that you can do without. Then why do you think I took your Yao core? I know that it's useless to you, but I still want to hold it in my hand to disgust you? The system showed the words again, and the words were very thick, as if it was expressing its anger. Hearing this, Lin Yuan slightly narrowed his eyes. What was that saying again? There was no loyalty in the Sui and Tang dynasties. It was the same in the Eldritch Age. In the entire Eldritch Age, there were almost no characters with good character. Lin Yuan also knew that once he stepped into the Demon King Age, even if he lost the system, he could still gather the power of incense. With the help of the Tao of totems that he walked on, the Yao core was indeed not that important. However, in the Eldritch Age, there were all kinds of strange ways to kill people. For example, in some unorthodox ways, just knowing the name of a person could make a person extremely unlucky. If it was supplemented by a personal item or hair, it could even complete a long-range killing curse. Otherwise, those Eldritch Age bosses would not have practiced the magical powers that could sense people's names just once. Lin Yuan didn't even dare to think about what kind of blow he would suffer if his monster core was taken by others to perform unorthodox techniques. Chapter 11:18. This involves some secrets. I can't tell you directly, but I can guarantee that your Yao core is definitely not in my hands. Moreover, even if the Yao core of this body of yours is in my hands, I won't use any unorthodox methods. Bah! I can't use any unorthodox methods. I am the heavenly Tao, how could I use such things? The system was still using bold words to emphasize its anger. Lin Yuan still narrowed his eyes, as if he was weighing the system's words. For some reason, he had an inexplicable sense of trust in the system's words. If you really don't trust me, you can go and check the monsters you created. They don't have Yao cores, so they are actually no different from this body of yours. If you really want to find fault, I can only say that their consciousness was personally given by you. However, you are different. You are a lucky person that I randomly picked from the ancient times. Do you understand? Lin Yuan thought for a moment, then sneered. So what you mean is that I am still under your control? Even if you can't do anything to my soul, this body was created by you. From the beginning, I can only stand on the same boat as you? I think you might be mistaken about something. First of all, the monsters created by the system don't necessarily have to stand on the same boat as their master. Unless you directly instilled a large amount of false memories into them like you did, causing them to be loyal and devoted to you from the moment they were born until death. However, you should know that I have never done such a thing to you, right? Therefore, it is impossible for you to have feelings of loyalty and devotion to me. However, there are some rules that are actually very pleasing. For example, if the monsters created by the system don't have the memories and concepts that you instilled, their bottom line is that they will not directly harm you. However, not directly is the biggest word game. For example, if you rely on that person, then I can't do anything about it. On the other hand, you can even deduce some of my arrangements and tell that person about it. From there, you can attack me because this does not violate the rules. After all, you did not directly harm me. This is a lesson learned from the mistakes of others. It is precisely because of that incident that I decided on the current strategy, which is to completely give up on letting you guys grow together and cooperate with each other. Instead, I will adopt the method of each person having their own world. All communication and transactions will be carried out through me. Last time, when you asked for help, I chose someone who already knew the coordinates of the Tianwu world. Then it is not difficult for you to guess that since I have learned from the mistakes of others, I will definitely not let those traitors off. However, in reality, I chose the current strategy, not because I don't hate them, but because I can't do anything. So you still suspect that I took your Yao core? The system's expression, the system's words, the system's zzz, the system's following the system's series of explanations, Lin Yuan's suspicions grew even stronger. The system's methods were all the same. Especially this body of his. From the black snake to the waterflood dragon, it was changed at will after a certain condition was met. If this body was not created by the system, Lin Yuan would have plucked his head off on the spot. However, Lin Yuan had used the system's ability to create before. Although it could combine different materials to create a new demonic beast, it did not skimp on the materials. While creating the demonic beast, it also took away a certain part of the demonic beast's abilities. However, if the demonic beast was really created, would it not produce a Yao core? Or could it be that the system had only given him a portion of the authority, and it was just acting? The system's explanation was half true and half false. Not to mention whether or not there had really been a case where the host had betrayed it, it would be a huge joke to say that the system had no way of dealing with betrayers. After all, hosts like them were sent to various worlds from the moment they were selected. They enjoyed the benefits brought by the system and grew rapidly. Even those with mediocre qualifications could quickly improve themselves according to the system's planned growth path. It was like a complete assembly line, providing the system with an endless supply of powerful soldiers to fight against Hongjun. However, was it possible for the system to be defenseless against them? There was no need to use Hongjun, a fierce person who had stabbed it in the back a long time ago. The system had lived for so many years and had been to countless worlds. With this experience, it was impossible for it not to know what would happen if it allowed the power in its hands to grow without limit. When that time came, even Hongjun would have to stand aside. As for guarding against traitors, sending the hosts to different worlds, this sounded like a typical lie. Although the Eldritch world had been hunting down the system and its subordinates all these years, the current situation in the Eldritch world was completely different from when it had escaped. First of all, the Grand Supreme had become a Chaos Daluo Golden Immortal, but he was unwilling to leave the Eldritch world to find another way out. Obviously, he wanted to take revenge on Hongjun. Besides the Grand Supreme, there was at least one other Almighty in the Eldritch world who could fight against Hongjun. Otherwise, Hongjun would not have watched the Grand Supreme become a Chaos Daluo Golden Immortal. Therefore, even if the system did not take action, Hongjun's position in the Eldritch world was in danger. Under such circumstances, not to mention a small world like the Tianwu world, it was not suitable for the Eldritch world to settle down. Even if it was a medium-class world or an upper-class world, unless it was confirmed that there was someone Hongjun had to kill, or there was news of the appearance of a strange treasure, Hongjun would not leave the Eldritch world without permission. He would also not casually release his capable subordinates. Just like this time, Hongjun already knew that his death tribulation was in the Tianwu world, but he still only sent Mosquito Daoren, Generals Hang and Ha. It was as if he did not care about Lin Yuan, the system, and the Eldritch world's Eldritch world. Lin Yuan. Thinking of this, Lin Yuan's expression suddenly changed. Generals Hang, Ha and Mosquito Daoren. Such a lineup. Was it really to assassinate him? With Hongjun's ability, when he last projected his consciousness, he had already confirmed the existence of the Shangqing Heavenly Lord. Therefore, with such a lineup, was it certain that Generals Hang and Ha did not send Mosquito Daoren to his death? Or, to set off a calamity? When he thought of this, Lin Yuan suddenly laughed bitterly and muttered, "I still underestimated you." Chapter 11:19. The cultivation tribulation was not a particularly lofty thing. To put it bluntly, it was also a kind of rule. The total amount of resources did not change, but the population was constantly increasing. When the population rose to a certain level, it would lead to the uneven distribution of all kinds of resources. That was the outbreak after the intertwining of fate and the superimposition of the chain of cause and effect. To put it simply, the things that could be obtained in one's hands were barely enough to support one's cultivation. At this time, if one wanted to live a better life, or even just to survive, one had to start a war with other people and other clans. The 4 great tribulations after the opening of the sky were all like this. To put it bluntly, it was because there were not enough resources to share, so various clans started to fight. With the fall of the dragon, phoenix, Kirin, Wu tribe, demon tribe, and many other forces that dominated the untainted land, the weak human tribe became the main character, which also meant that Hongjun had complete control over the untainted land. The investiture of the gods and the journey to the west were almost all planned by him. At this time, what they lacked was not resources, but Taoist orthodoxy and incense. Of course, the most terrifying cultivation tribulation was the first tribulation of the Dragon Han era. It was a period when resources were exhausted and could not be regenerated. The three clans each had their own territories, but they had to fight crazily, not for hegemony, but for survival. In this process, some people would inevitably be eliminated, and even all lives would be destroyed. After countless years, countless resources would be regenerated, and new lives would be born. After the first tribulation of the Dragon Han era, the dragon tribe declined and retreated to the four seas. Then they began to go downhill. From the overlord after the opening of the sky to the point where even a demon king could abuse his power in the four seas, one could imagine how terrible the dragon tribe was hit. The phoenix tribe also disappeared. Except for Kong Xian, Qingwan, and other great demons, there were few who could fight. Kirin was even more miserable. It had to rely on the way of heaven to become an auspicious representative. Otherwise, Kirin would have been exterminated during the first tribulation of the Dragon Han era. The legendary immeasurable calamity was not handled properly during the calamity stage, causing the calamity to become immeasurable calamity. The entire world had begun to collapse and had completely evolved into despair. At that time, it could be said that no one below the Sage Realm would be able to survive. There were 5 catastrophes in the untainted world: Kai Tian, Long Han, Lich, Investiture of the Gods, and Journey to the West. Except for Pan Gu's Battle of Kai Tian, the other 4 catastrophes were handled well under Hongjuan's control. They were even planned by him. After the Journey to the West, the untainted world entered a relatively stable period, which was the period when Hongjuan was completely ruling. It was also a period of crazy wars. Those who were observant would realize that during the period from the establishment of the Heavenly Court to the calamity of the Journey to the West, the Heavenly Court had gradually become stronger. Just on the surface, there were a total of 33 heavens. Taoism also had 10 big grotto heavens, 36 small grotto heavens, and 72 blessed lands. The Western sect also had the ever-expanding Western Pure Land of ultimate bliss. Even the unorthodox sects that were derived from Taoism, such as the school of Yin Yang, also had the 3 islands of Penglai, Fengzhong, and Yingzhou. If these places were placed in the normal world, they would all be ordinary names. At most, they would have beautiful scenery and a mysterious color. However, in the mythical world, these places were all grotto heavens and blessed lands that were formed when the untainted world conquered all the worlds in the untainted world. Ever since the untainted world entered a stable period, all the wars were against the outside world. If one thought about it carefully, they would realize that there had been no more catastrophes in the untainted world since the calamity of the Journey to the West. Therefore, many things had 2 sides to them. Hongjuan was indeed a complete dictator. He even stabbed the heavenly Tao in the back with his own strength, suppressed the Tao of humanity and Tao, and tampered with the cultivation path left for the future generations. In the later period, the cultivators became weaker. In the early days, there were still a few itinerant immortals who could fight with the old untainted world experts. As the Chan sect and the Ran sect slowly declined, the cultivation path was almost cut off. Those old untainted world experts were also regarded by Hongjuan as slaves, lackeys, and prisoners. However, on the other hand, Hongjuan also helped the untainted world to avoid the calamity of the catastrophes. He also set up a series of rules, set up the Heavenly Court, and gave those cultivators a chance to be ranked as immortals. One could say that he was cultivating his wings, but one could not ignore his contributions to the untainted world, even if his starting point was for himself. But then again, since ancient times, in the untainted world, how many amazing talents were there? Yang Mei, Chen Kuan, Shi Chen, and a series of big shots. Which one of them could shake the untainted world from time to time? During the initial tribulation of the Dragon Han, the Ancestor Dragon, the original Kirin, the 12 ancestors of sorcery, the East Emperor Tai Yi, and the Emperor Jun during the Great War of Sorcery and Demon. Any one of them was enough to kill the untainted world. Otherwise, the war between them would not have affected the entire untainted world. However, except for Hongjuan, who dared to say that he could control, plan, shift the catastrophes, and even gain a lot of benefits from the catastrophes. The title of Tao Ancestor might not be suitable for Hongjuan, but he was definitely the king of catastrophes. Based on the fact that Hongjuan could dominate the untainted world, there was no reason for him to be a person who did not use his brain. Such a person would usually plan before acting. If he was not completely confident, he would prepare a few more backup plans. Now, Mosquito Daoren was captured by Lin Yuan, and Generals Hang and Ha were suppressed by the 99 soul-scattering gourd. The situation could not be worse. Hongjuan's backup plan, or one of his backup plans, should show up at this time. However, the reality was, there was nothing strange. This did not make sense. Even if the backup plan could not kill Lin Yuan, in order to pave the way for other backup plans, a group of people should jump out at this time to kill Lin Yuan as much as possible. Therefore, the only explanation was that Hong Jun felt that Mosquito Daoren and Generals Hang and Ha were enough to kill Lin Yuan. That was the situation. Therefore, Lin Yuan was sure that Mosquito Daoren, Hang and Ha did not come to the Heaven Martial World to kill him. In other words, this was not Hongjuan's main purpose. After careful calculation, the Heaven Sovereign was about to be completed. At that time, there would be a change. Mosquito Daoren came to the untainted world to die. It was equivalent to repaying the karma he owed to the Jeschool during the apotheosized catastrophes. At this time, the consequences of a chain of karma were unpredictable. Perhaps nothing would happen, or it could set off a terrifying catastrophes. He had thought that he had overestimated Hong Jun, but he did not expect that the real killing move was hidden here. With a thought, the nether realm's black water that had been injected into the sealed space began to flow backward. It turned into black threads again and merged into Lin Yuan's scales. He gave up on chasing Mosquito Daoren. Chapter 11:20. Mosquito Daoren could not be killed. At the very least, he couldn't kill him yet. Mosquito Daoren had killed the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit. Even if he had the protection of the Grand Supreme, it was under the Grand Supreme's nose. Otherwise, with the protective nature of the sect leader, as long as he saw Mosquito Daoren, there was absolutely no possibility of him letting him go. Everyone was well aware of this. Therefore, in the investiture of the gods, although Mosquito Daoren had destroyed the plan of the Western sect and turned the Grand Supreme into a Buddha, which could be said to have made a great contribution, he did not receive any reward. He could only conceal his identity and not appear in the world. This was probably because the sect leader took the Grand Supreme into consideration. Otherwise, Mosquito Daoren's body and soul would have been destroyed. However, this time, Hong Jun asked Generals Hang and Ha to accompany Mosquito Daoren to the Tianwu world. His purpose was to make up for this karma. This was Mosquito Daoren who had violated the agreement between the sect leader and the Grand Supreme. Not only did he come out again, but he also ran under the sect leader's nose. If it was not because he did not want to be associated with the Grand Supreme, the Shangqing Sky Lord would have killed Mosquito Daoren long ago. He would not have prepared a set of immortal-slaying sword formation as a reward. Interesting. Really interesting. Lin Yuan muttered to himself with a gloomy look. He murmured, "You are indeed an existence who plays with the heroes of the untainted land in the palm of your hand. If you were not so confident to the point of conceit, I would have fallen into your trap." It was not clear how long the Shangqing Sky Lord had been active in the Tianwu world. However, when the ancient demon court suddenly disbanded, it was most likely because of this person. Otherwise, without the intervention of the Almighty of the Untainted Land, this group of escapees would not be willing to disappear without a trace. After all, no matter how one looked at it, the natives of the Tianwu world were not a match for this group of Almighty of the Untainted Land. Therefore, it was highly possible that Shangqing Tianzuan had imperceptibly intertwined with the karmic chain of the Tianwu world. The sudden appearance of Mosquito Daoren was tantamount to messing up the already messy karmic chain of the Tianwu world. Once there was a mistake, all the karmic chain of the Tianwu world would explode, artificially leading to a terrifying calamity. It was hard to say exactly how long the Heaven Martial World had existed, but one thing was certain. The Heaven Martial World was extremely ancient. After all, the existence of an ancient almighty like Hanba wasn't a big deal. However, Taoist Red Cloud was no small character. He was originally one of the 6 saints. During the time when Taoist Red Cloud was favored, even the Western sect's Urshi had to step aside. From this, it could be seen that although Taoist Red Cloud had appeared when the Western sect's Urshi saw Red Cloud, they would most likely have to call him senior apprentice brother. Since an existence like Taoist Red Cloud had ruthlessly tricked Hong Jun, it meant that Hong Jun would definitely not let Taoist Red Cloud go. Because Hong Jun was a dictator, and he was extremely suspicious. Even if he had the strength to look down on the untainted land, he still schemed against his juniors. He even hid his true cultivation path. At the same time, this also showed that Hongjuan's desire for control was extremely strong. He would not allow anyone to challenge his authority to appear. The reason why he could tolerate Ping Xian and Taishang was that Hongjun wasn't confident that he could kill them. Would a dictator like Hongjun allow someone like Taoist Red Cloud to exist? Ping Xian and Taishang were existences that Hongjun couldn't deal with even if he wanted to. However, Taoist Red Cloud didn't have the strength of a saint. So as soon as he appeared, he would be heavily targeted by Hongjun. The reason he had been able to live peacefully until now was mostly because Taoist Red Cloud had been obediently staying in the Heaven Martial World all this time. From this, it could be seen that although the Heaven Martial World was a minor kiliacosm, it had existed for as long as the Untainted Land. The Untainted Land and Primordial Chaos were two different concepts. The Untainted Land referred to the world formed after Pan Gu had split heaven and earth apart, not the primordial chaos that had given birth to 3,000 ancient gods and devils. During the heaven-splitting calamity, why had Pan Gu fought 3,000 ancient gods and devils? Because when the Untainted Land was first created, it was only a minor kiliacosm. It was impossible for it to contain 3,000 ancient gods and devils. So, Pan Gu had no choice but to fight against the devils that had been born from the primordial chaos. But even so, there were still people like Yang Mei, Hongjun, Qian Kuan, and others who had escaped the net. In order to prevent the Untainted Land that he had painstakingly created from being destroyed in an instant, Pan Gu had stretched out his neck and killed himself. He had transformed into the Untainted Land, causing the Untainted Land to transform from a minor kiliacosm to a middle kiliacosm, and even a major kiliacosm. The Heaven Martial World was still a minor kiliacosm while the Untainted Land had become a major kiliacosm. This could only prove the greatness and terror of the great god Pan Gu. At the same time, it also proved that the secret of the Heaven Martial World was not simple. During this long period of time, the Heaven Martial World had probably experienced many calamities. For example, the disintegration of the ancient demon court and the grassland wolf tribe and the other great demon clans had secluded themselves from the world. But now, the Heaven Martial World could be said to have been peaceful for a long time. In such a world, no matter how many karmic chains had accumulated, it was not enough to shock Lin Yuan. Even without the interference of outsiders like Lin Yuan, Taoist Red Cloud, and Shangqing Tianzuan, the next calamity would probably not be far away. Seeing that the heaven and earth were about to be repaired, there would definitely be strange phenomena. It was normal for a calamity to occur. Even if it was to fight for the secret of the Heaven Martial World, the natives of the Heaven Martial World would beat the brains out of people. The only thing that surprised him was that Hongjun had only projected the Heaven Martial World once. But he was able to make an accurate judgment that Lin Yuan, who had stayed in the Heaven Martial World for close to 3 years, could not make. He sent Generals Hang, Ha, and Mosquito Daoren in an attempt to cause a calamity. The word, terrifying, could not be more appropriate. What was even more terrifying was that if he did not have a sudden inspiration, he would have fallen into Hongjuan's trap. This point, even Shangqing Tianzuan, who was in the middle of it all, did not realize. After all, the existence of Shangqing Tianzuan was the most important part of Hongjuan's plan. Thinking of this, Lin Yuan glanced in the direction of Shangqing Tianzuan with a complicated expression. He sighed faintly. Shangqing Tianzuan was probably still waiting for him to kill Mosquito Daoren. Even if he did not kill Mosquito Daoren, Shangqing Tianzuan would do it himself. Because he did not care. He was just an incarnation of the good corpse. Not to mention whether he had the means to go through the calamity. Even if he did not, it was just a matter of time for the original body to condense him again. But for revenge, there was really no such shop after this village. He could not kill Mosquito Daoren in front of the Grand Supreme, could he? Chapter 11:21. To have such a... No, 2 younger brothers. Even an existence like the Grand Supreme would feel tired, right? One would die trying to protect his own, the other would die trying to save his face. Even the Grand Elder, who could suppress Yuanshi and Tong Tian, did not want to do anything with the 2 of them. He sent Tong Tian away for the sake of the disciples of the tribe of Jia, who bore the thunder during the God Investiture tribulation. He also sent Tong Tian away to avoid exposing the Grand Elder's plan. That was why he sent Tong Tian away, right? Of course, it had to be said that the Grand Supreme and Hongjun had reached a strange tacit understanding. If one thought about it carefully, one could see that Hongjuan's purpose was to set off a cultivation tribulation in the Tianwu world to eliminate Lin Yuan. After all, the cultivation tribulation was merciless. Only by becoming a saint could one survive the cultivation tribulation. Even if Lin Yuan had the protection of the system and the will of the world, he would not dare to say that he could survive the cultivation tribulation. Similarly, this was the most likely plan to kill Lin Yuan before the Tianwu world was promoted. There was an absolute karma chain between Mosquito Daoren and Tong Tian, and it was not an ordinary karma chain. The conflict between them came from another world, and this world was much stronger than the Tianwu world. This karma chain could be considered ancient. If it was suddenly stuffed into the karma chain of the Tianwu world, it would definitely be incompatible and complicated. Once it was triggered, it would instantly trigger all the karma chains. Moreover, who said that only Mosquito Daoren and Shangqing Skylord had a karma chain? Hung and Ha were not there for decoration, and they were not there to simply escort Mosquito Daoren to the Tianwu world. After the investiture of the gods, Mosquito Daoren and the Grand Supreme worked together to destroy the Western sect's Golden Lotus of Merit. Then, the Grand Supreme turned into a Buddha and became the Shakyamuni. However, there was also a saying that the Grand Supreme turned into a Buddha. The Western sect could not sit still and allow the Grand Supreme to take away the Western sect's merit and luck. Therefore, they separated Mahayana Buddhism and Hinayana Buddhism, and used Mahayana Buddhism to suppress Hinayana Buddhism to suppress the Grand Supreme. Looking at General Hang and General Ha, the two of them were originally the generals of the Zhou dynasty when they fought against King Zhou on behalf of the heavens. There were a lot of karma chains between them. After they died, they were conferred as gods and served the Western religious sect completely. They guarded the mountain gate of the Western religious sect for countless years and preached the teachings of the Western religious sect. Even if they did not make any contributions, they could at least work hard. They were not well known in the Western religious sect, but they were definitely not small figures. Therefore, this was the Western sect's stance. Hung and Ha accompanied Mosquito Daoren to their deaths. To put it bluntly, Hongjun needed to use the karma chain between Mosquito Daoren and Shangqing Skylord to trigger the Tianwu world's cultivation tribulation. Now that the Grand Supreme had become a sage, although no one knew what he was planning, he obviously did not need to give face to Hongjun. Since he agreed to this, he must have his own considerations. After these considerations, the Western sect that suppressed the Grand Supreme would not have an easy time. Hongjun was naturally happy to see this scene. After all, this involved the battle between Buddhism and Taoism, and even the battle between Mahayana Buddhism and Hinayana Buddhism. In addition to the karma from the investiture of the gods and the karma from the Xianmen tribulation, and all kinds of factors gathered together. Although the Tianwu world's cultivation tribulation could not be directly pushed to the level of immeasurable, its scale would definitely not be small. For the existence below the sage, the cultivation tribulation was definitely a terrifying thing. Strong experts like the ancestral dragon, Yuan Feng, and Shixiang Qiren, who quickly became the masters of the world after the untainted land, were still either killed or sealed in the cultivation tribulation. Later, the 12 ancestral sorcerers, Eastern Emperor Tai, Emperor Jun and other experts not only shattered the untainted land, but also crashed into Mount Buzhou and were almost wiped out. No one dared to say that they could play with the cultivation tribulation. Except for Hongjun, the king of the cultivation tribulation. Lin Yuan pondered for a moment and glanced at Shangqing Skylord, who was standing in the corner. He activated the All Things Have Spirit skill and directly began to communicate with Shangqing Skylord through consciousness. He also explained his point of view. The cultivation tribulation. I see. Shangqing Skylord's eyes turned slightly. There was no sadness or joy on his face, but he whispered softly. The Grand Elder asked his disciple to come, not to help that old thief, but back then. No, how is this possible? Could it be that he had already foreseen this day? Back then, the Grand Elder and the Prime of Heaven had a verbal agreement. Even if the Prime of Heaven knew that Mosquito Daoren did not really want to kill the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit, he was just schemed against by the Western sect. During the time when the Grand Elder set a trap for Mosquito Daoren to be captured by the Taoist guide, Mosquito Daoren could be said to have been tortured. In addition, his stomach was rumbling with hunger. Suddenly, he was released by the White Lotus Boy. When he saw a 10,000-year-old black tortoise that had been beaten back to its original form and was covered in injuries, his ferocity was stimulated. It should be known that the blood-winged black mosquito was an existence that was born in the netherworld Blood Sea. Looking at the Nether River Patriarch's great wish of killing all living beings to prove his Tao, one would know that there was no quality that could be related to good that was born in this area. However, whether it was intentional or not, the Holy Mother of Turtle Spirit died in the hands of the blood-winged black mosquito. For the Prime of Heaven, who was protective of his disciples, the two sides were mortal enemies. The Western sect could find the Western sect for their schemes in the future. Whether Mosquito Dowren was willing or not, since he was stained with the blood of the Prime of Heaven's disciple, he could not think of escaping unscathed. The Prime of Heaven's protectiveness was so terrifying. However, there was never a fairy tale in the world of adults. What remained unchanged was always benefits. The Grand Elder and the Premier saved most of the disciples of the Jie sect. At the same time, they sent the Prime of Heaven out of the untainted world in exchange for some promises from the Prime of Heaven. One of them was that if the Prime of Heaven saw Mosquito Dowren in the future, he could kill him. However, the Grand Elder only gave him one chance. If the Prime of Heaven did not kill Mosquito Dowren directly, then the karma would be over. Now, it seemed that the Grand Supreme had long predicted this day. Now, he had already attacked Mosquito Dowren. Not only did he attack, but he also successfully captured Mosquito Dowren. However, in the current situation, once Mosquito Dowren died, the Tianwu world would be set off a calamity. At that time, not to mention what the Black Jiao and the Red Cloud would think, even the Prime of Heaven himself could not guarantee that the incarnation of the good corpse could survive the calamity safely. However, if he let him go, it was hard to say whether he would have a chance to avenge his disciple in the future. Especially after the Grand Elder's enlightenment, the Prime of Heaven did not dare to say that he could not defeat the Grand Elder. Without this karma, if Mosquito Dowren came out again in the future, the Prime of Heaven could only watch helplessly. Otherwise, if he wanted to attack, he would have to fight the Grand Elder directly. Chapter 11:22. The corner of Shangqing Skylord's mouth twitched. Suddenly, he snorted and waved his sleeves. He said in a deep voice, "Boy, it seems that you are not fated to have the immortal slaying sword formation." Lin Yuan's eyelids twitched. He said helplessly, "Senior, please don't try to provoke me. If I really kill Mosquito Dowren now, I dare not say that I have 100% chance of surviving the cultivation tribulation. However, if I plan it well, I have a 60% chance of surviving." "Senior, do you have a great chance of surviving the cultivation tribulation?" Speaking of this, Lin Yuan paused and said with a faint smile, "In the same cataclysm, some people are easy to pass, and some people are sad. Just like when the deification ceremony was held, the Ren school and the Chan school targeted you. If you were in a different world and triggered another cataclysm, do you think those innocent people who were implicated will let you go?" Shangqing Skylord snorted again. However, he did not intend to continue the conversation. He looked like a rascal. There was only one chance to kill Mosquito Dowren. If he missed it, he would have to face the Grand Supreme directly in the future. For Tong Tian, a cultivation tribulation would only hurt him. However, if he were to face the Grand Supreme directly, it was not like a sage could not be killed. More importantly, the death of Taoist One in the hands of Lin Yuan and the death of Taoist One in his hands are two completely different concepts. The Grand Supreme had most likely guessed Hongjuan's plan. That was why he sent Mosquito Dowren to the Tianwu world. He wanted to eliminate the karma so that Tong Tian would not have an excuse to kill Mosquito Dowren. After eliminating the karma, no matter how shameless Tong Tian was, he would not bully a junior. Hongjun knew that the Grand Supreme had seen through his plan. However, he insisted on sending Mosquito Dowren to the cultivation tribulation. In fact, it was a gamble. He was betting that Tong Tian would find a way to kill Mosquito Dowren and set off the cultivation tribulation. As for Hongjuan's confidence, during the God Investiture tribulation, the Ren school and the Chan school joined forces to target the disciples of the Jie school. As the leader of the Jie school, the Tong Tian sect leader cursed and even went to the battlefield himself, causing the entire Jie school to be destroyed. After putting aside the many schemes behind, the character of the Tong Tian sect leader was very clear. For someone like sect leader Tong Tian, even if he was not in the untainted world, he could still be used as a pawn by Taishang and Hongjun. Even if sect leader Tong Tian knew about these schemes, he probably would not care. For him, it was completely acceptable to pay some price to avenge his disciple. Moreover, Although Shangqing Tianzuan was not a sage, as one of the three corpses incarnations, his real strength was definitely in the realm of a real god. As one of the Sanqing sect masters, how many incense and offerings did sect leader Tong Tian have? Just thinking about it was enough to make one's scalp numb. Moreover, sect leader Tong Tian now controlled a world. Even if the cultivation tribulation really broke out in the Tianwu world, Shangqing Tianzuan could still withstand it. Cultivators, demonic beasts. They all deserve to die. No wonder there were no demonic beasts or cultivators in the world that was completely controlled by the heavenly Tao fragment in my previous life. Even if there were, it was a legend left behind from ancient times. A cold light flashed in Lin Yuan's eyes. When living beings came into the world, there would be karma. Whether it was good karma or bad karma, there would be a day when it would be repaid. The heavenly Tao's job was to use the power of fate to deal with these karma chains little by little. Under the condition that it would not cause a great disturbance, it would be eliminated. Even if an ordinary person lived a long life, it would not be more than 100 years. After 100 years, the gratitude and grudges would be erased. Naturally, there would not be much karma left behind, and it would not be such a big burden to the heavenly Tao. However, cultivators and demonic beasts were different. Even in a small world like the Tianwu world, cultivators could easily live up to 300 to 500 years on the path of cultivation. If they went too far, they would be like those great demonic beasts and cultivators, using the power of incense to prolong their lives. They could even reform their bodies after death and be resurrected. It was precisely because of this that the karma chains were difficult to deal with. Once there was a mistake, it would directly set off a cultivation tribulation. Senior, please reconsider. Lin Yuan's eyes returned to calmness. Seeing that sect master Tong Tian did not speak, Lin Yuan pondered for a moment. Then he narrowed his eyes and said, Senior, you are unwilling to have karma with the Grand Supreme because you and the Grand Supreme are formed from the same chi. In addition, the Grand Supreme is now a saint of the Great Path. Senior, you boast that you may not lose to the Grand Supreme, but your chances of winning are not necessarily great. However, you are forcing me to do so today. Have you not thought that in the future, I may also become a saint of the Great Path? You! Shangqing Skylord's eyes moved. He was just about to mock Lin Yuan, but when he thought of Lin Yuan's deeds, he fell into a strange silence. The coming of a great era was a very mysterious thing. To give an example that sect master Tong Tian himself knew, the opening of the Hongmeng heavens was a great era. At that time, a terrifying existence like the great god Pan Gu was born. At that time, in the Hongmeng chaos, there was not only one intelligent existence like the great god Pan Gu. The so-called 3,000 fiend gods were naturally more than 3,000. Among them, there was no lack of terrifying existences like Yang Mei and Shi Chen, who had mastered the great Tao of space and the great Tao of time. But what was the result? The great god Pan Gu fought against 3,000 ancient fiend gods alone and won. He even took the remnant souls of the 3,000 fiend gods to refine the six-soul banner, an incomparably terrifying treasure. Although the six-soul banner would definitely devour the remnant souls of the 3,000 fiend gods, the six-soul banner could curse and kill 6 people at once. Even sages could not escape from it. One could imagine how terrifying this treasure was. They were all fiend gods born in the Hongmeng chaos. Why was the great god Pan Gu so much stronger than the other fiend gods? The great Tao of force was very strong. When one's strength was unleashed to the extreme, fate, time, and space could be shattered. However, this extreme also depended on the level of the opponent. If it was an adult fighting against a child, a punch would naturally have such an effect. However, which of the 3,000 fiend gods wasn't the manifestation of the sky demon's laws? The monsters that were born in the Grand Era were just so unreasonable. Now that the Tianwu world was about to be repaired, it could be said that a great era was about to arrive. Looking at the whole universe, the only existence that could be counted as a monster was the Black Jiao. What was even more terrifying was that the Black Jiao's sage path was right in front of them. Once the world was repaired, the Black Jiao could be said to have become a sage. He could directly control the netherworld and the underworld. At that time, the stronger the netherworld was, the stronger the Black Jiao would be. If it was someone else who told Tong Tian that the day of becoming a sage was just around the corner, Tong Tian would definitely spit on that person's face. However, when the Black Jiao said such words, although Tong Tian was not convinced, he could not find any basis to refute. Chapter 11:23. If that's the case, what do you think we should do with this? Shangqing Tianzuan thought that Lin Yuan was most likely a monster bred by the world and immediately softened his tone. However, his killing intent towards Mosquito Daoren did not disappear. Instead, it grew stronger. There was no other reason than pure hatred. What did Mosquito Daoren do to deserve this? He was just one of the 5 ferocious insects of primordial world. In terms of background, he was not even in the eyes of Shangqing Tianzuan. Even the golden cicada, one of the 5 ferocious insects of primordial world, could be subdued by the Western sect. Moreover, the one who subdued the golden cicada was the guide Taoist. Anyone who was familiar with the untainted land knew that the Western sect did not have the qualifications to become a sage. Even if they duped the Red Cloud Taoist and joined hands to snatch the demon master Kuanping, the two of them had made many great ambitions to become one of the 6 sages of heaven. In that case, what was the difference between the blood-winged black mosquito, the 3rd of the 5 ferocious insects of primordial world, and an ant in the eyes of sect leader Tong Tian? However, Mosquito Daoren had a supreme who had become a Tao saint as his guarantor. Moreover, the future sage, Black Jiao, was not willing to kill Mosquito Daoren at this time. Rounding up, these 2 sages were bullying sect leader Tong Tian. What was the difference between this and the investiture of the gods' tribulation? Oh, there was. In the investiture of the gods' tribulation, the Chan sect, the Ran sect and the Western sect worked together to fight him. That person did this to trigger the Tianwu world's cultivation tribulation. His purpose is to kill you and me. After all, once the cultivation tribulation starts, the will of the world will definitely not let us off as the culprits. Now that we don't have the power of a sage, the possibility of us dying is naturally greatly increased. Taking a step back, even if we can withstand the cultivation tribulation, after the cultivation tribulation, we don't even have the power to resist the invasion of the untainted land. At that time, no matter what we are planning, it will all be in vain. Therefore, in my opinion, we can't kill Mosquito Daoren. At least we can't kill him now. However, you don't have to wait for too long. Now that the heaven and earth restoration has become a general trend, any human or demon who tries to stop it will be crushed into pieces. Even without that person's plan, the cultivation tribulation will start anyway. At that time, won't Mosquito Daoren be at your mercy? For now, what we need to do is to accelerate the heaven and earth restoration as soon as possible. After the cultivation tribulation ends, you don't have to suppress your power. Mosquito Daoren can also be killed easily. We have left our trump cards behind. How we fight for it is our own business. However, if anyone from the untainted land wants to take a share of the pie, we can just kill them. Lin Yuan organized his words and quickly gave his suggestion. Starting the cultivation tribulation and participating in it were 2 different things. Starting the cultivation tribulation and causing countless living beings to suffer the pain of the cultivation tribulation, if the karma chain smashed down, those below the sage realm would definitely die. However, participating in the cultivation tribulation was different. Whether or not they could survive would depend entirely on their own abilities. They wouldn't be targeted in any way. More importantly, once the heaven and earth restoration was completed, Lin Yuan could only say that the great Tao was within his reach. However, in fact, he could barely open the netherworld and comprehend the Tao. He was almost at the level of a sage-to-be. Taoist Red Cloud and Lord Shangqing were probably able to burst out with the fighting strength of a sage-to-be. As for the sage realm, it did not exist. The middle world could not bear the power of a sage. Lin Yuan was not a kind person. He also wanted to know the secret of the heaven martial world. However, even in the small world, Lin Yuan might not be able to defeat Taoist Red Cloud and Lord Shangqing. Even if Hanba came, Lin Yuan could only run away, not to mention these 2 experts who were at the peak of the sage-to-be. It was impossible for him to snatch something from them. Reality was reality. This was not a game where one could start all over again. Every choice was dancing on the edge of a knife. If one was not careful, one would die. If Lin Yuan wanted to fight against these people, or in other words, if he wanted to officially participate in the struggle for the secret, he had to make up for the whole world. Moreover, he had to quickly control the netherworld, comprehend the Tao, and obtain the combat power of the sage-to-be level. Only then would Lin Yuan have the ability to participate in the struggle. Otherwise, let alone snatching the treasure, the others could easily kill him. Lord Shangqing squinted his eyes and looked at Lin Yuan carefully. Even an old man could become a demon, not to mention Tongtian's sect master who had lived for countless years. Of course, he could see that Lin Yuan must have a plan when he made this proposal. However, what Lin Yuan said was indeed reasonable. After all, participating in the cultivation tribulation and starting it were two completely different difficulties. Tongtian's sect master was not as powerful as Tongtian's sect master, so he naturally avoided it. Secondly, although Lin Yuan's proposal was beneficial to him, if the heaven and earth restoration was not completed, the secret of the heaven would not be revealed. More importantly, no matter how powerful Black Jiao was, after the heaven and earth restoration, he would at most be in the sage-to-be realm. However, there was a gap between sage-to-be and sage-to-be. For example, the strength of the great ways they cultivated and the divine senses they mastered. Not to mention, in this middle world, the strength he could unleash was at least at the peak of the sage-to-be, which was completely different from that of a sage-to-be. Shangqing Tianzuan thought for a moment and said with a smile, Lin Yuan, although I don't know why you are so obsessed with this matter, you should know that whether it is me or Hong Yun, we all have a deep hatred for that person. And you are just an entrant. Is it worth it to gamble your life for that thing? This time, it was Lin Yuan who was silent. Fine, fine. Shangqing Heavenly Lord smiled and turned around to walk away. He said indifferently, let's do as you say. I don't care how you think. However, you have to remember the words no regrets. Don't say that I didn't warn you. Seeing that Lord Shangqing had left, Lin Yuan's eyes narrowed. He took a deep breath and condensed the limitless ghost again. It wrapped up the space that had been sealed by the willow branches and disappeared without a trace. Then, he looked meaningfully at Generals Hang and Ha who were still suppressed by the soul-dispersing gourd. Then, he swung his tail and rushed toward the northern frontier. At this time, Generals Hang and Ha could see that it was not Lin Yuan who was fighting against them from the beginning. Then, there was no doubt who could control the soul-dispersing gourd. Even though Generals Hang and Ha had lived for countless years, they could not help but show despair on their faces. It was too difficult to beg for a way out from that person. Chapter 11:24. Outside the Great Wall of the Northern Frontier. Slaughter could be seen everywhere. The cavalry of the Shuangjian dynasty was battered and bruised under this Great Wall pass. After much difficulty, they finally broke through the pass. Before they could count the various resources and provisions they obtained, they heard a thunderous boom. Then, this seemingly indestructible pass collapsed, crushing and injuring countless warriors of the Frost Mirror grassland. Moreover, before they could dig out their comrades who were buried under the rubble, the Northern Frontier cavalry and the soldiers guarding the pass that they had beaten back came back again. Moreover, they relied on their superior equipment to push them back again. Humiliation. Absolute humiliation. The warriors of the Frost Mirror grassland had never lost a battle on the plains other than against demonic beasts. However, when they encountered the army of the Northern Frontier, it was as if they had met their nemesis. First, the light cavalry crashed into the enemy's heavy cavalry. When they finally gathered the Blood Liao cavalry and planned to fight the enemy head-on, the enemy suddenly played a trick and dealt them a heavy blow. The Blood Liao cavalry that was at the front were almost all caught in the explosion. Even if they weren't killed on the spot, they were buried under the rubble. As for the light cavalry that weren't seriously affected, when they saw the Northern Frontier dragon riders coming back, they didn't have the courage to charge at the enemy. They were either killed on the spot or found a chance to escape. However, the nightmare didn't end there. Because at the border between the Northern Frontier and the Frost Mirror grassland, a large number of soldiers wearing black armor and holding the black water flag appeared. They directly blocked the retreat of the Frost Mirror grassland cavalry. After several failed attempts to break out, the remaining Frost Mirror grassland cavalry gathered together again. At this moment, they felt like they were useless. They couldn't defeat the cavalry of the Northern Frontier in a head-on charge. In other words, there was no such thing as a head-on collision. The cavalry of the Northern Frontier just took out their crossbows and charged forward. Forget about charging forward, they would be lucky if they didn't get torn apart by the rain of arrows. When they finally saw the infantry of the Northern Frontier, they immediately became ferocious and started to charge. In the end, the Blackwater army was also equipped with those terrifying crossbows. Although they were not as extravagant as the cavalrymen, who each had a crossbow, there were still around a dozen crossbows in a troop of around 300 people. However, these crossbows could not achieve the same suppressive firepower as before. There were still some cavalrymen with superb horsemanship who charged into the enemy's formation. And then, it was ridiculous. Because their scimitars were supported by horsepower, zhenqi, or earth energy. With a single slash of their scimitars, even if they could not break mountains and crush rocks, they could seriously injure ordinary demonic beasts to the brink of death. However, when they slashed at the armor of the Blackwater army, they only left a shallow white mark. If it were a battle between mortals, good armor alone would have been useless. A single slash of a scimitar with horsepower would have caused a certain amount of damage, even if it could not cut through the armor. It would have been very normal for the enemy to be sent flying. However, the Blackwater army was different. Every member of the Blackwater army was a cultivator, and even the weakest of them was at the advanced stage of the airborne realm. As long as the scimitars did not cut through their armor, the shock of the impact could be suppressed with a thought. At most, it would only cause them to be stunned for a moment. On the other hand, the cavalrymen who slashed at the enemy slowed down after failing to hit the enemy. Many of them were cut down by the Blackwater army. The cavalrymen could not defeat them. The infantry could not defeat them either. Was this a war? Was this a joke? They finally understood why the Shuangjian dynasty had split into two groups. Although the group that went into the Central Plains was badly damaged by the Sky Demon, there were still some who made it back alive. On the other hand, the Frost warriors who went into the northern frontier were all wiped out. Even the 13th prince died in that battle. That was an all-around crushing defeat. It was not like what Shuangjian Khan had said before. It was because the number of cavalrymen who went into the northern frontier was even fewer. More importantly, the decision made by the Heavenly Khan, who claimed to be a famous general of the era, did not seem to be a problem at the time. After all, the wealth of the northern frontier was beyond their imagination. If there were such fearsome cavalrymen outside that pass, why couldn't there be similar deployments at the other passes? On the contrary, the Shuangjian dynasty turned around and hid their surprise troops, waiting for the cavalry of the northern frontier to come out and attack the pass. At that time, the northern frontier would have to either give up the pass and give up on the 30,000 cavalrymen outside, or lose the pass and die. If the northern frontier had chosen the former, they would have only been able to stall for a few days before dying. On the other hand, the armor and crossbows that the Shuangjian dynasty obtained after wiping out the 30,000 cavalrymen would have been able to instantly boost the military strength of the Shuangjian dynasty to a whole new level. But what happened in the end? The Shuangjian dynasty did not choose either option at the northern frontier. The 30,000 cavalrymen and the 50,000 soldiers guarding the pass simply avoided the battle and waited for the Shuangjian dynasty to attack. The Shuangjian dynasty had foolishly fought their way in and fell into the second trap of the northern frontier. In one battle, the Shuangjian dynasty had lost the Shuangjian dynasty's pride, the Shuangjian dynasty's Blackwater army. But that was not the end. The Shuangjian dynasty had never expected that the northern frontier's Blackwater army would not be stationed at the other passes. Instead, the Shuangjian dynasty's army had set off from the route that they had abandoned and circled behind them, cutting off their escape route. Now, the Shuangjian dynasty's army was squeezed together and no one could find a way out. If there were people who came from the same world as Lin Yuan, it would be easy to see that the strategy adopted by Lin Yuan in this battle was similar to the first battle of Emperor Wu of Han against the Xiongnu people, which made countless people sigh and sigh because the officials were greedy and afraid of death and leaked the secret, which led to the failure of the plan. Mai's plot. A failed plan, but it was the origin of the war between Emperor Wu and the Xiongnu. Tracing back to this period of history, anyone with a discerning eye could see how amazing Emperor Wu's strategy was. Since ancient times, farming civilizations and nomadic civilizations had been in constant conflict. Even during the reign of King Zhou of Shang, the Shang dynasty and these barbarians could be said to be irreconcilable. But there were three problems that had to be solved in the war between farming and nomadic civilizations. First, they could not win. Second, they could not find them. Third, it was not worth it. First, how did Emperor Wu deal with it? He used the wealth that Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing had accumulated during their recuperation to open horse ranches among the people. He obtained a large number of war horses and crossbows to train elite cavalrymen. During the war between Emperor Wu and the Xiongnu, the wealth that Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing had accumulated, as well as the taxes that Emperor Wu had collected, were all used up. That was why he was known to be militaristic. But in reality, the Han dynasty had been forced by the Xiongnu to ask for all kinds of money, technology, and princesses. Emperor Wu had launched an all-out war against the Xiongnu. He had even almost wiped out the Xiongnu. Chapter 1125. After solving the problem of not being able to win, Emperor Wu changed his weak attitude towards Empress Dowager Dou and took the initiative to declare war on the Xiongnu. At the same time, he displayed his military talent, the Mai stratagem. Emperor Wu's attitude was very clear. The grasslands were very big, and he could not find you. However, he had to beat you, so he would let you beat him. Therefore, Emperor Wu lured the Xiongnu to invade Han territory and set the location of the final battle at Mai. To put it bluntly, if not for Emperor Wu's inexperience at the time and his lack of consideration of the problem, such as the military official Chen Yu entering Han territory and seeing a herd of cows and sheep without any herders, he would not have become suspicious. If he did not become suspicious, he would not have captured the Han officials. If that Yanmen commandant had risked his life for the sake of the country instead of revealing the Mai stratagem to the military official Chen Yu, then in this battle, Lu Che would have been able to defeat the Xiongnu and there would not have been a full-scale war. If this battle had been successful, the Xiongnu would not have the capital to fight against the Han dynasty. Because in the following series of battles, the Han dynasty would have single-handedly suppressed the Xiongnu. The phrase, "the merciful do not command an army," was absolutely appropriate for Lu Che at this time. Of course, this kind of low-level mistake was a mistake that only a newbie would make. If Emperor Wu of Han had planned this battle, not to mention the military official Chen Yu, even if all the Chen Yu of the Xiongnu were added together, they would only be toyed around in the palm of Lu Che's hand. It was still the same saying, reality was reality. It was not a game that could be replayed after losing. Emperor Wu of Han paid the price for his mistake, which was the 44 years of all-out war between Han and Xiongnu. And this was only because of Emperor Wu's military talent, because the third factor was the most important. This was also the reason why Emperor Wu of Han was able to unite the Han dynasty under Empress Dowager Dou's control and fight against the Xiongnu for his passion and unyielding spirit. During the Han-Xiong War, Lu Che opened up the western regions and established the famous Silk Road. Moreover, it was not like Qin Shi Huang who conquered the Six Kingdoms. He used more than 40 years to integrate the western regions into the Yan Huang Empire. At that time, all the countries in the western regions thought that they were part of the Great Han, even after the fall of the Western Han. This was because after the Eastern Han was established, the western regions quickly returned to the embrace of the Great Han. Many people thought that this was because the countries in the western regions were afraid of the Great Han's iron cavalry. Although this was a factor, it was more because Lu Che unified the culture and ideology of the countries in the western regions, making them feel that they were part of the Great Han from the bottom of their hearts. Even during the Three Kingdoms period at the end of the Eastern Han, Boss Chow unified the western regions more easily than he unified the Central Plains. Not only that, Emperor Wu of Han also reclaimed the Heshi Corridor and turned it into a horse racing ground for the Han dynasty. This was the reason why the Great Han dynasty's cavalry could dominate the world. Even in the world's hegemony at that time, only the noble Frost cavalry could compete with the Great Han dynasty's cavalry. However, the noble Frost Empire was originally a nomadic civilization, a people on horseback. From this, one could see how strong the Great Han dynasty's cavalry was. After solving the three problems that had to be solved in the war between an agricultural civilization and a nomadic civilization, it was the legendary life of Emperor Wu of Han. From the historical records, Emperor Wu of Han fought with the Xiongnu for 44 years. The territory expanded nearly doubled, but the population only decreased by 10%. This was also due to the fact that the landlords annexed the land and population. He also conquered the western region, opened up the Silk Road, and laid a solid foundation for the Yan Huang dynasty to become the Celestial Empire. Such a great emperor, even with Lin Yuan's current knowledge, could not help but be called a king of men. However, he was scolded for being militaristic for so many years. There were also people who compared Li Shimin, who was fooled by the Confucian sect and wrote the Imperial Norms, which was a shameful work for human kings, to Lu Che. They even felt that Li Shimin should be the greatest emperor of all time, surpassing the Qin Emperor and Emperor Wu of Han. However, if one did not look at the Song dynasty's scholars who forcefully flattered the Li Tang dynasty in order to cover up Wu Zetian's achievements, Li Shimin could only barely reach a passing level among the human kings. Not to mention the so-called greatest emperor of all time, even the word great did not have anything to do with him. Another person who was praised as the Kaiyuan era, Li Longji. The biggest mistake in his life was that he died too late. His era was left behind by Wu Zetian. He would not be able to clean it up completely. After all, although Wu Zetian was the only empress and was criticized by others, if one understood the history, one would realize that this empress' achievements were only inferior to Qin Shi Huang and Ying Zheng. During the Wu Zhou dynasty, there were 26 kingdom wars and 21 victories. She even started the so-called Great Asian War. She used the strength of a single country to fight the 5 major countries of Asia. There were as many as 15 countries that participated in the war. As for Wu Zetian, she won 5 out of 5 battles and was called the top of the world. The other countries worked together to build a Wu Zhou Tianshu for her. At that time, all the kings of the various countries left their names on the Wu Zhou Tianshu. Wu Zhou was the strongest country in the world. It was comparable to the pillars of Ashoka and Trajan's achievement pillar. It was even taller than the other 2 achievement pillars. What was more terrifying was that the Wu Zhou dynasty did not spend a single cent to build the Wu Zhou Tianshu. It was built by the surrounding countries spontaneously. And then, it was pushed down by Li Longji. More than 130 countries were so angry that they broke off relations with the Tang dynasty. Under the defamation of the Confucian sect, who claimed that they were connected to the heavens and were bestowed by the gods, but did not do it themselves and instead asked others to abide by the heavens and extinguish human desires, people like Qin Shi Huang, Han Wu, Sui Yang, and Wu Jiong, who had no qualms about Yan Huang and human kings, were all defamed miserably. Lin Yuan's war against the Shuangjian dynasty was based on Emperor Wu of Han's Mai strategy. He had never denied the terror of these cavalrymen on the grasslands. Even if they could not defeat the army of the northern region head-on, they could still make use of the mobility of cavalry to harass, attack, and even cut off the northern region's supplies, causing the northern region's army to be exhausted on the grasslands. That was why Lin Yuan would not take the initiative to attack the Frost Mirror Plains. It was not the right time. However, that did not stop him from copying homework. It was fine that the Qianwu world did not have a terrain like Mai. When Lin Yuan was building the Great Wall, he had already prepared this pass. He wanted to create an artificial Mai for the Shuangjian dynasty to use as a battlefield to kill them. As for the quality of the northern frontier army, it was not a problem that they could not defeat the Shuangjian dynasty. It was only a matter of whether they were easy to defeat or not. Furthermore, Lin Yuan had learned from the experience of the human kings in his previous life. He first cleaned up the sects and aristocratic families. Only then did he plan to deal with the neighboring Shuangjian dynasty. Chapter 1126. Without the intervention of the aristocratic families and sects, Lin Yuan had the final say in the northern frontier. The Sky Demon, who had previously hindered Lin Yuan, had also lost contact with the Nether River Patriarch because the Patriarch of Yangmei was guarding outside the heavenly gates. Thus, he had become a wandering ghost and was unable to affect the northern frontier. This could be considered as helping Lin Yuan to get rid of a major problem. In addition, Lei Fan, Su Yan, Luo Su, and the others had been exposed one after another. Under Li Xian's investigation, the Northern Restoration Society was also in a worse state day by day. It could be said that there were no internal and external troubles. Now, he had also settled the relationship with the Hengduan mountain range. The decision-makers of the Chuyun dynasty had been wiped out and the demon venerable of the southern wasteland had been severely injured. Furthermore, these 2 parties were now hated by the Hengduan mountain range. In a short period of time, they would not be able to affect the northern frontier. As for the Qinjiang dynasty, it was simply trembling in fear in this revolution that anyone with a discerning eye could see. After all, the dragon clan of the 4 seas behind them was still being suppressed by the demonic beasts of the outer sea. How would they have the time to care about them? At this time, it was obviously unrealistic for them to provoke the northern frontier. There were no internal and external troubles. Wouldn't they jump up and violently knock on the heads of these reckless barbarians in the Frost Mirror grassland? Therefore, the magically modified version of the Mai plot began to show its power under Lin Yuan's plan. The main forces of the Shuangjian dynasty were first badly battered at the pass. Then, when the Black Water Army cleaned up the immortals and entered a state of encirclement through various transmission formations, the fate of these Shuangjian barbarian was already decided. Lin Yuan did not need to consider the problem of whether he could defeat them or not. In fact, when the northern frontier was in a state where he had the final say, Lin Yuan did not need to consider the problem of whether it was worth it or not. However, such a matter could not be done this way. Now, those who gathered under Lin Yuan, in addition to the original people of the northern frontier and the immigrants of the Shenwu dynasty, there were also a large number of people who felt that they had some ability and wanted to fight for a future in the northern frontier. Otherwise, in 3 years of continuous battles, Lin Yuan was not a god. How could he ensure that the population under his rule was always in a state of growth? These people who gathered from various places to the northern frontier, after several rounds of screening, most of the people who were just there to make up the numbers were eliminated. The remaining people more or less had some ability. Whether it was going on a campaign or governing a place, there were some good seedlings. Although the northern frontier could not attract any sects to rely on, it was not inferior to sects and aristocratic families. Their cultivation realm might be low, but their ability was absolutely well developed. It should be known that the existence of a sect, unless it was supported by a particularly powerful sect headquarters, was composed of a few or a dozen aristocratic families. The so-called operating model of a sect was to select the talented children of these aristocratic families and send them to the sect to cultivate peacefully, providing the aristocratic families with protection in terms of martial strength. The resources needed for the operation of the sect were completely provided by these aristocratic families. Otherwise, Lin Yuan would not have said before that the sect should disintegrate into aristocratic families and enter the northern frontier. It should be known that even if the children of poor families or the lowest grassroots were really talented, there were very few who could enter a sect. Most of them would stop at being handymen. Those who could be selected as outer core disciples were already at the level of dragons and phoenixes among men. Therefore, it was basically impossible for a sect like the one in fantasy novels to exist. From a logical level of thinking, if it was not formed by a group of powerful aristocratic families, then it would be impossible to gather the resources needed to operate a sect. If you wanted to snatch the rice bowl of others, you would need to have the ability to do so, right? A group of unrelated people mixed together was not called a sect. It was called a gang, a mountain stronghold, or a guild. Strictly speaking, they belonged to the forest. But a sect was different. A sect was a real aristocratic identity. When the disciples of some powerful sects went to a place, even the local officials had to give them some face. But who had ever seen the officials give face to those local ruffians? After eliminating the idea of the aristocratic families being scattered to various places and allowing these aristocratic families to form sects to protect places, Li Zhong held the military and political power of the northern frontier firmly in his hands. The remaining aristocratic families, whether strong or weak, could only cooperate with the northern frontier. It was not a peaceful time now. Without the protection of martial strength, you would not even know how you died. But a high degree of centralization of power was not necessarily a good thing. For example, right now, the number of talents from all walks of life in the northern frontier had reached a saturation point. If it were not for the internship system, the northern frontier would have long since become redundant. Moreover, as talents from all over the world gathered at the northern frontier, the students of the Northern Frontier Academy graduated according to their qualifications. This was indeed a headache for Li Zhong. Therefore, expansion had become the most important thing. Sky Demon was not easy to deal with. Or it could be said that this group of bastards were like cows in sheep's clothing. They could be dealt with, but they were very difficult to eradicate. Therefore, they had to be dealt with last by Lin Yuan. At the very least, he had to form a team specifically to deal with Sky Demon. Therefore, there were not many options for Lin Yuan to choose from. Northern Frontier Prince's Mansion. Lin Yuan and Li Zhong looked at each other for a moment. Li Zhongcai squinted his eyes slightly and said in a deep voice, "Lord Dragon King, I don't really understand your plan. Expansion is an urgent matter for the northern region, but we can obviously choose a better plan, such as reclaiming the other territories of the Shenwu dynasty. First of all, we are in the right in terms of the law, so no one will be afraid of us. Second of all, we will have to deal with the otherworldly demons sooner or later, so it doesn't make much difference if we do it sooner or later. Why don't we take advantage of the fact that they have lost their command and launch a large-scale attack?" He paused and added, "Of course we are very clear about the trouble that Sky Demon is in. Even if we don't deal with Sky Demon now, we can still choose to attack the Qingjiang Empire. If we go through the Hengduan Mountains, we can directly ignore their river defense line. If we fight on land, let alone the northern frontier, any one of the empires can directly beat them up. So, what is your suggestion?" Lin Yuan blinked and looked at Li Zhong playfully. The Chuyun Empire. Li Zhong's face darkened as he said sternly. Seeing that Lin Yuan did not speak, Li Zhong quickly added, the Qingjiang Empire is no match for us. Therefore, if we request to pass through, they will not ignore us. Moreover, the Chuyun Empire has shown goodwill to us and ceded a large territory to us. It is reasonable for us to attack and occupy the Chuyun Empire's territory now. Why do I have such a stupid brother? Li Xian, who was wearing a silver flying fish robe and a black cloak, stopped standing at the side to act as a guard. He glanced at Li Zhong with disdain, then his face was filled with disappointment. Chapter 11:27. I'm stupid. Li Zhong's expression changed. He growled. What do you know? You better manage your Imperial Secret Service. Don't tell them what to do. Li Xian sneered and turned his head to the side. It seemed like he couldn't be bothered to debate with Li Zhong. Li Zhong turned his head back and said, Your Majesty, I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart. The Frost Mirror Grassland is of little value to us. First of all, the climate of the Frost Mirror Grassland is changeable. During the day, it can steam people to death, and at night, the wind can freeze people into ice sculptures. There are poisonous insects and swamps everywhere. Moreover, it is impossible to build a city because the terrain of the grassland is constantly changing. Some places may be solid soil today, but the next day, they will be washed into swamps by the water. Some places may dry up from wetlands and become habitable. If we build a city, I'm afraid that it will collapse before the city is built. Who said I'm going to build a city on the grassland? Lin Yuan was slightly startled. He looked at Li Zhong helplessly. Li Zhong wasn't stupid. On the contrary, he was very smart. He could handle all kinds of government affairs in the northern frontier with ease. Even if he was involved in some unfamiliar areas, he could quickly grasp them and make the most beneficial decisions for the northern frontier. However, he was too steady. So steady that it was frightening. What kind of brain circuit did he have to think of building a city on the grassland? If a city could be built on the grassland, what would be the point of those nomadic civilizations? Besides, the northern frontier's gathering place wasn't built like a city. The relationship between the northern frontier and the Hengduan mountain range had always been good. Those monsters wouldn't rashly attack the northern frontier. Under such circumstances, the northern frontier didn't need a city wall to protect the gathering place at all. The northern frontier's army wouldn't be afraid of anyone in the field. Even if it was a monster, the northern frontier's army would bite off a piece of flesh. The reason why he built the northern frontier's Great Wall wasn't because he couldn't defeat the Frost Mirror Barbarian in the field, but because the Frost Mirror Barbarian's mobility was still there. No one could ignore it. In addition, the northern frontier didn't have a city wall. Once they bypassed the northern frontier's army, it would be a disaster for the ordinary people living in the northern frontier. Lord Dragon King, I know that the northern frontier doesn't build a city wall, but you should also know that the grassland and the northern frontier can't be compared. The northern frontier's geographical environment is like mountains and rivers. Even if there aren't any conspicuous cities, people won't get lost. However, the grassland is an endless expanse of green grass mixed with a large number of wetlands that can't be walked on. The climate is also extremely bad. It's very difficult to cross the grassland without preparation. Even if you have a map, it's easy to get lost. What's more terrifying is that once you get lost in the grassland, you'll basically starve to death, freeze to death, or even be poisoned to death by those poisonous insects. Unless you're extremely lucky, you'll die before you find the tribes on the grassland. If you still maintain the policy of the northern frontier and don't build cities on the grassland, unless you're willing to pay a huge price to train people who are familiar with the grassland's terrain and prepare guides for every team that goes to the grassland will be a land of death for us. Li Zhong took a deep breath and felt a slight pain in his temples. He said, You know the financial situation of the northern frontier. The tax rate can be said to be extremely low. It's already good enough that it can barely operate. The research and construction of the Ministry of Works are all relying on the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Now that the northern frontier needs to feed more and more people, the market is becoming more and more saturated. Our financial problems have to be solved. Before that, I absolutely won't agree to you continuing to expand your expenditure. That's why I said you're stupid. Li Exine crossed his arms in front of his chest and sneered again. Seeing that Lin Yuan didn't speak and being provoked by Li Exine again and again, Li Zhong suddenly slammed the table and stood up, roaring angrily, "I told you to shut up. Don't you get it? You want me to cut the Imperial Secret Service's budget by half in the second half of the year, and you'll be happy, right?" Ha! Li Exine sneered, squinted his eyes and said, "It's a waste to choose you as the king of the northern frontier. You're good at defending, but not good at attacking. Can't you look further? For example, what if the Dragon King's goal isn't the Frost Mirror Grassland but to use it as a springboard to attack the Deadwood Dynasty? If you rethink your plan, the situation will still be the same, and the Frost Mirror Grassland will be useless, right?" Li Zhong was choked by Li Exine's words, but he didn't refute immediately. Instead, he simulated the map in his mind and then opened his eyes to look at Li Exine. He licked his lips and was speechless for a moment. What kind of king brain is this? We haven't even conquered the Frost Mirror Grassland, and we're already thinking about attacking the Deadwood Dynasty? After waiting for a while, seeing that Lin Yuan didn't say anything, Li Zhong turned to look at Lin Yuan blankly and said in a deep voice, You can't really think like that, right? Lord Dragon King, the Frost Mirror Grassland isn't useless. I have other uses for this region, but Li Exine is right. I want to use the Frost Mirror Grassland as a springboard to attack the Deadwood Dynasty. This is our next phase of the strategic deployment. The corners of Lin Yuan's mouth opened, revealing a ferocious smile. After being hit by Lin Yuan, Li Zhong immediately leaned back. His eyes were filled with shock. That's why I said you're really stupid. Why don't you think about it? There are so many people in the Frost Mirror Grassland. Why don't we accept these people to contribute to the northern frontier when we have an absolute victory? Why do we let the Hengduan Mountain Range's demon beasts run amok in the Frost Mirror Grassland while we attract the Shuangjin dynasty's main forces? Li Exine looked at Li Zhong with a grin and said with a hideous smile, "Since the Dragon King made this deployment, he never wanted to take the Frost Mirror Grassland, let alone leave those barbarians alive. Think about it. After some time, when the news of the Frost Mirror Grassland's main forces being wiped out reaches the grassland, and the Hengduan Mountain Range's demon beasts are slaughtering the barbarians, where will those Shuangjin barbarian go?" Gulp. Li Zhong swallowed his saliva. His face was a little pale, as if he was frightened by the speculation in his heart. The sudden attack of the Hengduan Mountain Range's demon beasts will definitely catch the Shuangjin barbarian off guard. At that time, what they will have to do is to resist the slaughter of the demon beasts. However, don't forget that the Dragon King promised those demon beasts that the demon beast tide attacking the Frost Mirror Grassland this time will not be the small fries in the periphery. Every clan will send out their elites. With the remaining strength of those tribes, they will definitely not be able to contend against these demon beasts. Therefore they can only escape. To the north is the Hengduan Mountain Range, to the south is the area controlled by the Sky Demon, and to the west is our northern frontier. They definitely won't dare to go to these three places. Therefore they can only escape. Li Exine still had a hideous smile on his face. Chapter 1128. Li Zhong pondered for a moment and realized that was indeed the case. He was not an argumentative person. As long as there was no problem with logic, he would not ask questions like, "Why are you so sure?" Since the northern frontier was established, the Shuangjin dynasty had fought 2 wars with the northern frontier. In both wars, the Shuangjin dynasty was the one that was annihilated. Therefore, no matter how bold the Shuangjin dynasty barbarians were, they would not continue to flee to the northern frontier when they had nowhere else to go. To them it was a path of certain death. The Great Wall of the Northern Territory wasn't just for show. It was a defensive facility that even their main army and regular army couldn't defend against. If the Northern Territory decided to shut itself in, they could only wait for their deaths at the foot of the Great Wall of the Northern Territory. That was why it was better for them to run to the Witherwood dynasty from the start. Intelligent life forms all sought advantages and avoided disadvantages. This was an indisputable fact. The Shuangjin dynasty had never won a battle against the northern frontier. The Shuangjin dynasty had never lost a battle against the Witherwood dynasty. Or rather, it could not be said that they had never lost a battle. After all, the Shuangjin barbarian would invade the borders every year, just like how they had to deal with the beast tide every year. The Shuangjian barbarian did not care at all. The things that the Shuangjian barbarians stole every year were not even enough to cover the cost of dispatching an army. Therefore, they turned a blind eye to it. However, at this time it was a clear psychological hint. Only death awaited them if they went to the northern frontier, but there was still a chance of survival if they went to the Witherwood dynasty. Therefore, a large number of Shuangjian barbarian would definitely swarm into the Witherwood dynasty, and they would be able to reach the Frost Mirror grassland in an instant. The Witherwood dynasty would not ignore these exiled Shuangjian barbarian either. After all, the two sides were mortal enemies. It was fine if it was a small-scale Shuangjian barbarian, but if so many Shuangjian barbarians suddenly swarm in, the Witherwood dynasty would have to be crazy not to exterminate them. At this time, the army of the northern frontier was marching toward the Frost Mirror grassland. They could still use the excuse of exterminating the demon beasts. In addition, Lin Yuan had negotiated with the Hengduan Mountains. The army of the northern frontier could be said to be unstoppable. Even if they ran into a demon beast army, the army of the northern frontier would most likely avoid them. The army of the Shuangjian dynasty was not fighting the Shuangjian barbarian. No demon beast clan dared to send their elites to clash with the army of the northern frontier, especially at this juncture where the demon beast master selection was taking place. Once the army of the northern frontier passed through the Frost Mirror grassland, the rest of the story was very simple. Faced with the tight defensive line of the Witherwood dynasty, even if the army of the northern frontier could penetrate it, they would have to pay a heavy price. However, in reality, in order to surround and intercept the Shuangjian barbarian, the army of the Witherwood dynasty would definitely mobilize most of the troops to guard the border. After all, they would never expect the northern frontier to attack them. Penetrating such a defensive line was a piece of cake for the army of the northern frontier. After passing through the border that was easy to defend and difficult to attack, they would be like tigers entering a flock of sheep. They would be able to devour large amounts of territory in the blink of an eye. Not only would they be able to generate a huge amount of income for the northern frontier, but they would also be able to solve the employment problem of a considerable portion of the talents on the northern frontier. Li Zhong rubbed his forehead and said in disbelief, "I understand the logic, but why the Witherwood dynasty?" After all, there was no reason to attack a dynasty. What was the difference between the Azure River dynasty and the Witherwood dynasty? On the other hand, attacking the Witherwood dynasty might seem easy, but in reality, it would lengthen the battle line of the northern frontier. It was very likely that it would be difficult to take care of both the front and the rear. This would undoubtedly increase the difficulty of the battle for supremacy on the northern frontier. Are you stupid? Are you stupid? Tell me, are you stupid? Li Xian sneered with a mocking expression on his face. That's enough. Can you show some respect to your elder brother? Li Zhong slammed his hand on the stone table in front of him again. He looked like he was about to have a brain hemorrhage. I'm just speaking the truth. First, you have to be clear about one thing. The 7 great empires have occupied the Sky Martial continent for close to 10,000 years. Even if we exclude the Guardian of the Gate of Heaven and the other hidden powers, in these 10,000 years, the 7 great empires will have produced countless shocking geniuses. With the accumulation of this foundation, it will be an extremely terrifying force. I've traveled around the 7 empires in the past, learning various knowledge and experiencing various occupations, so my understanding of the 7 empires far surpasses your elder brother who only knows how to read books. I can even guarantee that once the 7 empires are united, even the Heaven's Gate protectors will have no choice but to avoid them, let alone the northern frontier that has been established for less than 3 years. Of course, if our Dragon King is willing to be a puppet and allow the aristocratic families, sects, various guilds, and chambers of commerce to grow, then the 7 empires will naturally not be united. The ones who will deal with us will be the aristocratic families of the 7 empires, the relatives of the royal family, and the armies they control. As long as it's not an all-out war, our northern frontier will not be weak in a one-on-one battle. But the problem is, in the Dragon King's ruling style, there has never been a place for sections. Even the aristocratic families have to obediently abide by the rules set by the northern frontier to exist. Once they break the rules, it will be a disaster. Not to mention the existence of those guilds and chambers of commerce. None of them will be able to surpass the association of the Demon Emperor and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce when they're in power in the northern frontier. So if they're left alone, there will only be 2 results. Either they disband on the spot, or they'll be eaten up by the northern frontier. In such a situation, the northern frontier will not only have to face the ruling class of an empire, but also the entire world. Li Xian put his hands behind his back with an arrogant look on his face. He grinned and said, "However, our Dragon King has cleverly made use of one thing, which is the inertia of history. In other words, in the Dragon King's plan, our threat must be the least." Wasn't this bull***T? Li Zhong really wanted to spit at Li Xian's face. The northern frontier's threat level was small? How F***King small could it be? Anyone who wasn't an idiot would know that the structure of the 7 empires in the Qianwu continent was already set in stone. However, after the northern frontier began to grow wild, this structure was broken. When the Xinwu dynasty was still in existence, the northern frontier had already shown its prowess. They even openly sent troops to occupy the north, standing against the Xinwu dynasty across the Wei River. Now they were indifferent to the land occupied by the Sky Demon, and they were attacking the Frost Mirror grassland. This clearly broke the rules and informed the other empires that the unchanging structure had changed. From now on, all the powers would enter a stage of reshuffling. And why would the northern frontier, who had broken all this, become the least threatening of all the independent powers? You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.